Hey, everybody. Great to see all y'all out there today. Yo, we are starting something. We are getting real again, guys. It is my pleasure to introduce you to a brand new series. A series which I think is actually going to be a hell of a lot more interesting than the previous Son of Sam series. Not to diss what I did or what we all did, but this one, there's just something about it. Can't quite put my finger on it, but we're going to all take a journey and we're going to do it all together. It's going to be fantastic. So great to see everybody out there. And what are we learning about today? What are we doing? What are we starting? What are we embarking on? We're going to be talking about the strange death of Alfred Hunt Howell. Yes. And what are we doing really? Well, today we're throwing a stone in a pond. We are, when I started Son of Sam, going on almost 2 years ago now, I didn't realize what that first video was going to do for me, for all of us. I just went out to make a video one day because, well, I was sitting there unemployed and underemployed, I should say, completely bored, completely going nuts. And I wanted to start an art project, essentially. And I had no idea that that first video was essentially going to be what? A stone in a pond, sending out ripples, waves, which, well, went all the way to shore and back. And on its way out towards the shore, well, it caught a lot of people in its wake. And that's what I'm hoping that we're going to do with this series. Today we're going to be laying the foundation. Yes, we are. And my hope is that, of course, that certain people see this show, that start watching this series, because there are people out there who know something or two about this case, and they're keeping their mouths shut. I know it. I feel it. Okay. So we're hoping to get people involved, and of course, I want to give a huge shout out before we start in earnest to two particular people who have helped me immensely on this journey so far. Because as I always say, guys, and I don't know why people feel otherwise out there, but it ain't about me. It's about we. So I want to give a big shout out, of course, to the queen of all queens, Ruby Almighty. This woman has been a godsend to me, of course, and no less so in this series as she was in the Son of Sam series. I put a call out for a genealogist yesterday, and little did I know that the great Ruby was a wonderful genealogist, in addition to a fantastic researcher. So thanks to her, we have a whole bunch of articles, genealogical surveys, and whatever you call them, that are going to really help us in this endeavor that we're taking together. And of course, I want to give a shout out to the following gentleman: the great book club warrior 22, who in his experience as a policeman, as a cop here locally in the Bronx at the 52nd precinct, and I'm not outing him, he already outed himself, he has given me a lot of insight into the workings of my own precinct, the 50th precinct. And why do I say my own precinct? Well, because this story that we're going to be learning about today, starting today, and hopefully taking us on a deep dive, because I have a feeling about this. In fact, I think this is much more interesting than Son of Sam ever was, and we'll get into that. But this took place in my neighborhood. This took place here in Riverdale. This took place in the neighborhood where I grew up, where I have all my connections, where I worked as a newspaper reporter. And in fact, one of the protagonists in our story today, Nikolai Aman, was indeed a childhood friend of mine. So this story is, I didn't realize how near and dear it was to my heart. But boy, since starting this research, it has become incredibly interesting to me. And I've already thrown the stone out. It's the last 2 weeks I've been contacting people. I'm getting people who I never would have spoken to otherwise, and they're getting interested in this story. So I have a feeling that this is going to be a good one. This is going to be an amazing series. If nothing else, even if we don't end up finding out what actually happened, it's going to be an interesting insight into a neighborhood, into a certain class of people, into the intersection between two different, completely disparate social groups that existed in the same neighborhood. And I'm talking about the world of Alfred Hunt Howell versus the world of Nikolai Aman. So, of course, that intersection where they allegedly came together is what we're going to be discussing. So we have so much to do, so much information to get through on this first show. And we got almost 40 people watching, which is great. Welcome, everybody. Please participate in the chat. Make yourself known. I see all the stalwarts in the chat. We got John. We got Linda. We got Moet. We got Fallout Zone. We got James. We got, well, World Traveler. We got Nikos Moss. Well, Lydia Lily. We got the gangs all here. All right, guys. Well, listen, got a lot to get through today. And as you know, I just like to get right into the heart of the matter. So may I present to you guys the strange death of Alfred Hunt Howell. All right. Well, this lonely gravestone with the word Hunt inscribed onto it with no other information is apparently the resting place of the ashes of Alfred Hunt Howell. And why is he ashes? Well, strangely enough, his body, once they found it, they took it right away. As far as I can tell, absolutely no wake, no ceremony, no autopsy. Okay. And they just cremated his body right away. So, in searching for his grave and pictures of him, this came up, and well, a very lonely gravestone for a person who I have a feeling was a very important person in American history. Okay, and we'll be getting into that. So, this was a quote, this one here, that really bothers me. Okay, it bothers me immensely. And this was taken from a newspaper article about the murder investigation and the so-called, I'm calling it the so-called murder investigation because they want me to say that it's a murder. They want me to believe it's a murder. The simple fact is, after reading these files, and there's close to 600 pages of files on this, put out by the same people who put out the files on Son of Sam, and we'll get into that in a second. This was a quote in one of the articles that really bothered me. It appears to be a perfect murder committed by an imperfect murderer, a source familiar with the probe said. Well, that doesn't even make sense, right? It doesn't. First of all, perfection can't really be achieved, right? So perfect murder and then a perfect murder committed by an imperfect murderer. Well, if he's an imperfect murderer, how the hell did he commit a perfect murder? Like, there's logical fallacies in this, and I understand what the person was trying to say. But just this quote alone bothers the hell out of me, especially given the things that we're going to learn in this video series. And we're going to start to learn today, but in this video series, I say, because I'm planning on turning this into a Son of Sam type video series where we do deep investigations, where we speak to principals, where we talk to the people involved, where I try to find local people. Because remember, I knew Nikolai, but I only knew him up to a certain age. And I'm hoping, again, that the stone that we throw into the pond today catches people in its wake. And but the benefit is, as opposed to the Son of Sam investigation that we did, we are starting out with all the files that we need to really start to make sense of this. And also, we have perfected our methodology. It took me 2 years, right? Well, a year or so to figure out how to do the Son of Sam investigation correctly. Remember, that first video that I did in March of 2021 was just, well, it was bullshit. I mean, I was following the liar, the bullier, the manipulator, and the abuser, Maury Terry's words. And we all know how that goes, and that went. And we're not going to make the same mistakes again. So we've learned a lot. We know exactly what to focus in on, and we know exactly who to speak to. So all that starts now. So this is bothering me. The perfect murder committed by an imperfect murderer. Well, I don't know. As we're going to see, I don't think it was quite that easy. And yes, John Catalano, my boy, my research partner on Brooklyn, the legendary Son of Sam researcher, John Catalano, one of the top 5 people in the Son of Sam world right now, for sure. Yes, this took place in my neighborhood. So we're going to get into that actually right now. Well, up until now, Howell has been an abstraction, okay? And this is the way that the conspiratards, or as my new friend Nicholas Schreck puts it, the conspiranoid maniacs, they love working in abstraction. They love abstraction. Okay, and of course, for those of you who don't know what abstraction means, it's ghosts. It's not vague. It means not detailed, right? An abstraction. In the world of the conspiratard, in the world of the conspiranoid maniac, people aren't people. They're abstractions. They don't exist. Look at the way Wheat Carr, for instance, was treated in the Son of Sam investigation, including by me, up to a certain point, until I realized, with the help of my research partners, that she was completely innocent. And then I went on a crusade to make sure that this real person who was affected by a real crime, which in itself was committed by a real person, and where there was real forensic evidence investigated by real police officers. Okay, we need to take people out of the world of abstraction. But how did we get into this in the first place? How did we get into the Howell murder in the first place? Well, I remember this happening in real time. I remember reading about it in the newspaper, not the death of Alfred Hunt Howell, and we'll get into that, but the reopened investigation into what they called his murder, because of the name Nikolai Aman. And as soon as I read that, I said, Nikolai, oh my God, that's my childhood friend. And we'll get into Nikolai and who he was a little bit more later in today's show. But that's when I first heard of this, but I didn't really think anything of it, right? Okay, Nikolai kills just some old man in Riverdale, right? Didn't have any clue who this guy was, didn't really care. Until, of course, I got into the Son of Sam case in 2021 as a researcher and read what I now know to be a ridiculous work of fiction by, unfortunately, a victim of Son of Sam, although he doesn't think that he's a victim of Son of Sam. Carl Denaro in his book, The Son of Sam and Me, Why I Wasn't Shot by David Berkowitz. Well, we all know that Carl Denaro was in fact shot by David Berkowitz. He writes about it very, very detailed. He talks about how he shot Carl with one hand because he wasn't sure in those early shootings, and that's why it was all wild. He answered all those questions. And then, of course, the bullier, the manipulator, and abuser, Maury Terry, took this guy and used him as a human shield to give his completely bullshit investigation what I call a sheen of credibility, by using victims like Carl and Nasa Moskowitz, and by using clearly easily manipulated witnesses like Tommy Zano. And also, as we're learning, problematic detectives like Hank Chinati. And Eric knows how I feel about Hank. I have respect for him, but he knows exactly how I feel about Hank and his methodology on Son of Sam. So I'm not speaking out of turn. Maury used these people, right? And one of the legacies of Maury Terry was, of course, with these researchers that he surrounded himself with, people of the lowest quality, right? People who thought that because someone had a last name that somehow or other they were connected to everything, right? That's how you end up with Howell in Carl's book as an alternative suspect raised by another researcher whose real name is not known to me. Well, first of all, that's horrible right there. You should know who's putting out information, especially if you're going to print this guy's name in your book, as one of the two people suspected of being Mr. Real Estate. Mr. Real Estate is suspected of being the mastermind behind the Son of Sam attacks. So yeah, this guy, Alfred Howell, goes because remember, in the beginning of my video series, I believe this claptrap, right? So all of a sudden Alfred Howell becomes for me this old man, this abstract old man to Mr. Real Estate. Oh my God, he did it, he's guilty, because his name's in the back of some book, right, with no sourcing. The guy's name who says it doesn't even give the guy's name who raised it. We have no provenance of any of this evidence. I don't understand it at all. Okay, Carl should be embarrassed at this, quite frankly. So he was an abstraction, and these conspiranoid maniacs, these conspiratards, love looking at people as abstractions. Okay, and of course they went further. They said that Billy the artist from Son of Sam fame sketched him in Untermeyer Park. So now all of a sudden we have the connection. Well, in the conspiranoid maniac's mind, we have the connection between Alfred Hunt Howell and Untermeyer Park, right? So it's just getting ridiculous already. And this is the kind of research, this victim as abstraction, perpetrator as abstraction, right? That I've been trying so hard to fight against. And I can't wait for my discussion with Nicholas Schreck tomorrow night, because he feels the same way. And of course, he's much more old school than I am. This dude was out in the 80s talking about this stuff and getting the same attacks worded almost exactly the same as the attacks that come on to that people put on me. Okay, that I'm a member of the process, that I'm a Satanist, that my father was Operation Mockingbird, all of these totally ridiculous things that come out of the conspiratard's mind. So right here, you're seeing conspiranoid mania, conspiratards, the old school of true crime research that we are putting, well, we're putting that out to pasture. It's old news. Okay. Alfred Hunt Howell is this man right here. Now, now I know what you're saying. Wait a second. That looks just like Moloch. That looks just like the drawing that Billy the artist did in Untermeyer Park. Well, first of all, I don't know how Billy the artist could do a drawing in Untermeyer Park. It was dark out. I don't know why Moloch would be why Alfred Hunt Howell would be hanging out with 20-year-olds in the park. Now, this isn't to say that Alfred Hunt Howell wasn't an important dude, wasn't a high up dude, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes. Okay. But Moloch, Mr. Real Estate, the dude that Billy the artist, so-called Billy the artist, and let's look a little bit more at Billy the artist, right? Well, first of all, this picture that we see here, okay? This picture came out of a Riverdale press, and we're going to talk about the Riverdale press as part of this. See, I love this series because this is my neighborhood. This is my people. I know these people. I wrote for the Riverdale press. I know all about these people. Not their deep, dark pasts and histories and secrets, but I'm of these people, okay, in this neighborhood. And before y'all conspiratard maniacs say, oh, he said he's of them, that means he's involved. Well, first of all, involved with what? Second of all, involved with who? I'm of them. I know these people sociologically and culturally. Okay, so this picture of Alfred Hunt Howell came from this article, which was dated 1995. And as we have talked about in my Son of Sam series, Billy the artist didn't exist. This was another fallacy, another total lie made up by Maury Terry, because he knew he didn't have any real evidence, so he had to invent stuff. And for those of you who are saying, oh my God, man, he's talking about Maury that way, I have 100 videos where I prove every one of my points. Okay, just go watch them. And of course, look at the date. Billy the artist first makes his debut in 1997. Okay, so 2 years after this article was written, with this picture in it that just happens to look exactly like Alfred Hunt Howell. Okay, so my contention, and this is my belief, and I'm sticking to it, Maury Terry gave some artist, probably not even this dude, I don't know who the hell this guy is right here. Okay, he gave some artist the picture from the newspaper, right? The guy drew it, and then 2 years later, they used it as evidence in 1997, while this is Sarah Wallace from the ABC News interview, where Berkowitz and Maury Terry met for the first time, and where all these pictures of Moloch and Ken and all these supposed drawings emerged for the first time, because they didn't emerge before 1997. Right here, an ABC interview, an interview with David Berkowitz was set up with Maury Terry as the producer. So ABC didn't even vet Maury Terry. They just allowed him to produce the series, the segment. And we know what happens when Maury's producing something. The lies, the manipulation, the distortion, and the abuse comes out. Okay. So this here, the timeline works out again for my theory that Maury Terry made up this crap. Somehow or other, some artist got a picture of Alfred Hunt Howell and went with it. And of course, the artist also looked at Mr. Creepy from Creepy Magazine, right? I mean, this is ridiculous. All right. I mean, this is complete crap. Look at the similarities between that picture and this picture right here. And besides, Maury Terry named a guy named James Donovan as Mr. Real Estate. So how the hell did this guy Howell get involved in Son of Sam? We'll never know. Okay. But the point is that's how I got interested again in the Alfred Hunt Howell story. And I put it on the back burner because, quite frankly, Alfred Hunt Howell was a ghost. He doesn't exist online other than some obscure genealogy and some newspaper articles, mainly about this incident. Very little is about him online. So remember, for the conspiranoid maniacs, for the people still stuck in 1987 thinking that Berkowitz was a member of a cult and that Mr. Real Estate was hanging out at Untermeyer Park directing the Son of Sam crimes, well, as my friend Yuri from Poland so brilliantly created the meme, and it says, I'm not saying it was all satanic cults, but it was satanic cults. And of course, this is the what we're fighting against as researchers. So let's get serious. And before we get serious, I always have to take a little swig of water. My serious water. Who was Alfred Hunt Howell? And I want to really get into this because we are, as I like to put it, laying the foundation. And of course, in order to lay a foundation, in order to build an edifice, what we're doing, we're building something here. Remember, this is a PhD level course. You guys are getting doctorate level true crime at this point. Okay. We need to establish who this person was because the conspiratards didn't do it. They ridiculously put this guy's name in some obscure book and said he was Mr. Real Estate because someone whose name they didn't know told them so. Okay. These people should be ashamed of themselves, and they've been relegated to the dustbin of history. And that's the last we'll talk about them, at least in today's show. But who was Alfred Hunt Howell? Well, we have very little information on this guy. In fact, the most information you're ever going to get about this guy is going to be in today's show. And we actually went deep, and I'm gonna go deeper as time goes on for sure. Okay. But well, here we have his connections, right? And again, this is the man. And one thing I want to point out is this dude was like, this picture was taken in 95. This was a year before his death. So he was above 80 years old. Look at his powerful arms. He's got muscle tone. He's got biceps and triceps. He's got beautiful forearms. Okay. Now, I'm not saying anything. The reason why I'm not making any specious connections. I'm not saying that this dude used his arms for things. I mean, he was a gardener. And one of the things that gardening does is it gets you into shape. Okay. In fact, this dude was heavily connected to gardens, as we're going to talk about more in this show today. But he married a woman named Ruth Rhea, and we'll talk about her a little later, in 1938. She died a few years before his death. He had 3 children, Anne, Alfred Hunt, and a dude named Henry Parrish. I don't know why his last name isn't Howell, but who knows? So his father was a dude named Alfred Corey Howell. His mother was Florence Aunt Hunt Howell. His spouse was Ruth Rhea, sorry. Alfred Hunt Howell, Henry Parrish Howell, there we go, Henry Parrish Howell, and Anne Howell, who was the mistress of A. Joseph Armstrong. Okay. So that gives us, and that gives you, because remember, it ain't about me. It's about we. I need your guys' help on this. Now, I've done a lot of research on these people, so I already know quite a bit that I'm going to present to you. But researchers out there, now you have names that you can go out and find connections with. And boy, do we actually need connections in this case, because as I'm going to posit a little later, I believe, this is just my belief, I'm not saying it that I have proof of this, but I believe that Alfred Hunt Howell and his coterie, his gang, his people, his friends, his connections. We're American royalty. We're literally the deep state that we all talk about and wonder who they are. I think you're looking at one of these people right here. Okay. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. So he was a banker. Okay. Alfred Hunt Howell, American former banker, decorated Order of Cedars, Lebanon, recipient Order of Red Triangle, Young Men's Christian Association, Greater New York. He was born in 1912 in Wyoming, Ohio, son of Alfred Corey and Florence Alice Hunt Howell. He went to Princeton University, where he got his Master of Arts. He got his Master of Philosophy at Columbia University in 1978, and a Doctor of Philosophy at Columbia University in 1993. So, of course, Princeton, Columbia. Major, insider institutions. Okay, now I know what people are going to say. See, that's proof. Columbia. That means he was guilty, right? Because what passes for research in the conspiratard community is if someone went to Columbia University, that means something somehow. I mean, come on, guys, we need to get a little bit more nuanced in the way that we do these things. So he's listed as a noteworthy banker by Marquis Who's Who, and I have no idea what that is. I should have gotten into that a little bit more, but we don't really need to worry about that now. He was the director of the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, Greater New York, from 1954 to 1984. President of now emeritus. I guess he was president now emeritus of that organization. He was a trustee in the National Council of the Young Men's Christian Association, now emeritus. Chairman, State Executive Committees, Young Men's Christian Association. Trustee of the Frick Collection, American University in Beirut. Okay. Now remember, researchers out there, this is serious stuff. These are serious connections. This isn't the pissant David Berkowitz wigging out on Pine Street. That's nothing compared to this. Even if you believe that he was involved in Operation Together, this David Berkowitz, which wasn't true, this dwarfs anything in Son of Sam in terms of the connections to the deep state. Okay. AUB Foundation, Board of Directors of the Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation. We're going to talk about them a little bit more. Vice President with the United States Naval Reserve. Okay. European Theater of Operations. Member, Middle East Studies Association, Century Club, Grolier Club. So now this is something that all of y'all amateur researchers, professional researchers, true crime people, now you have a ton. Alfred Hunt Howell's here. We have a million spokes of the wheel coming out. We got to find out who this guy was even more. Okay, but here is his death, his obituary in the Riverdale Press, written none other by Celia Stein. We're going to talk about Celia Stein in a few minutes. Okay, she was one of the co-founders of this newspaper, the Riverdale Press, which we'll talk about again in a little bit more. So here's another picture of Alfred Hunt Howell in his Riverdale garden. Okay, with his, can't see it as well here, but his powerful forearms. And Alfred Hunt Howell, a banker, community leader, philanthropist, and scholar who led Riverdale Neighborhood House. Now, these are names that you're going to want to write down. Remember, we're taking a course here. This isn't just entertainment. This is an investigative series into something that I think can be big. Maybe I'm wrong, but this dwarfs anything that we have ever spoken about before. Son of who? Okay, now you have names. So Riverdale Neighborhood House, we're going to talk more about that. Died on April 23rd, and this was 1996. Mr. Howell suffered a heart attack in his Riverdale home, according to his longtime friend and neighbor, Gilbert Kerlin. Write that name down. He was 83. Okay, he was the oldest person ever to earn a PhD from Columbia University, completing his dissertation in 1993 at the age of 80. A tireless walker, he crusaded for trailways in Van Cortlandt Park, right? Where have we heard that before? Karen Wallstrom, she was found in the Alfred Hunt Howell Grove. Now, when she allegedly killed herself, it was not yet the Alfred Hunt Howell Grove. Okay, that came later. That came in the 80s. Okay, she was found in 1964 or 5. But we see all the familiar names to us. Okay, he served as president of the Riverdale Neighborhood House. We're going to talk a little bit more about them today. And he was described as a courtly gentleman. Oh, wait, look here. Mr. Howell presided over the construction of the Bayard Dodge Memorial Pool. Dodge, remember that name, Dodge. He loved doing things for children and teenagers. He was a courtly, gracious gentleman of the old school who favored bow ties and dazzled acquaintances with his smile. Mr. Howell moved to Riverdale in 1946. He was married to Ruth Rhea Howell, a niece of Cleveland E. Dodge, whose family was one of Riverdale's founding families. Okay? Remember this name, researchers, people who I'm treating with respect. Remember, I treat my audience as if you guys have a brain, as if you're intelligent. Okay, we're not doing the troglodytions here. We're this is PhD level stuff. But with that comes responsibility. You guys need to help me in this. I'm reaching out to every one of you in the audience who may know these people, who may be able to research more about these people. Cleveland Dodge, whose family was one of Riverdale's founding families. Now, again, this is Riverdale in the Bronx, an extremely exclusive community. Up till about now, I would say that Riverdale is actually losing its luster rapidly, especially after the lockdowns. I told these fools in this neighborhood, you're supporting something which is going to kill your neighborhood. Now, auto theft is up 500%. Robberies, break-ins, drag racing down these main roads that never existed before. Okay, these people love their Democrat politicians, and they always have. But in either case, he was married to Ruth Rhea Howell, a niece of Cleveland E. Dodge. All right, so the rest of this is basically talking about his affiliations. He was affiliated with Leake and Watts Children's Home, okay, Van Cortlandt Development Corporation, New York Botanical Gardens, okay, where I taught. Remember, I have often said that the gardening world in New York is run by the Eyes Wide Shut crowd. You are seeing one of these people right here. Now, I don't want to cast any aspersions, because I have no proof that this guy, Alfred Hunt Howell, was into anything nefarious. But we are going to talk about his associations, his connections, and we're going to see who was he involved with, and by your neighbors ye shall know him, right? Type of thing. So he was involved in the Riverdale Nature Preservancy and all of these stuff, Riverdale Yonkers Society for Ethical Culture, which that's an old society, ethical culture. Okay, Friends of Van Cortlandt Park and Wave Hill, where I was trained as an intern. All right, so the rest of this, what I'll do is I'll post these up on my Twitter after our show is done today, so you guys can collect these things and read them on your own. But this is the article. This is another article that came out about him, which I found interesting. This was the one that I showed before, which was from 1995, right up here. A not-so-secret garden, a special program at the Botanical Garden gives kids the chance to get their hands dirty with delicious results in a not-so-secret garden. And this is all about how Ruth Rhea Howell, how she donated a lot of money to, we're going to talk about it. Okay. In fact, right here, the same article. Okay. Alfred Howell in his own garden is a trustee of the Dodge Foundation. Okay. Dodge Foundation. Remember that. It was a Dodge grant of $600,000, which made the Ruth Rhea Howell garden possible. So by 1995, Ruth Rhea Howell was already dead. And so what must have happened is they must have created this garden at New York Botanical Gardens in her name using a Dodge Foundation grant. And as we've already learned, Ruth Rhea Howell was a Dodge family member. She was a granddaughter of the Scion, Cleveland Dodge, which we'll look at in a minute. But one thing I want to talk about real quick in this article is just to give a shout out to the author. Now, why am I giving a shout out to the author? Well, It's actually rather bittersweet and tragic for me. Marina Lockman was a friend of mine in junior high school, and we were actually very friendly. We remained friendly through high school. She was a neighborhood girl. She was an immigrant from Russia. Actually, much like Nikolai Aman was an immigrant from Russia, and came to the United States at around the same time. Marina came in maybe a few years later, I think, than Nikolai. Nikolai was already in Riverdale by 1983. Marina, I remember she came in like sixth grade. So that would have been 1985, 86. And she was just a beautiful girl. She was so nice. And now I say why was because unfortunately Marina died in 1998. And she existed before the internet really existed. And so there is no online presence of Marina Lockman anywhere online except for a few tributes given to her, one of which was written by me in the early 2000s. Marina was an amazing person. My father was a community activist back in those years, and he was fighting overdevelopment, and he had this project that he was fighting against, a new 18-story building that was going in on a former like area, a house. It was just a two-story house, and they were starting to do that in the late 90s in the Riverdale neighborhood, where they were just knocking down beautiful old homes and putting up these huge, my father called it a monstrosity. And Marina was really, really key in helping my dad out. She publicized his campaign, and he didn't get the building not built, but they only built it to 14 stories. Not that that was a victory, but it was a victory in a sense. And he couldn't have done it without the help of Marina. And so I actually rekindled a friendship with Marina in those years, and I wanted to hang out with her. I wanted to not be romantically involved with her. It wasn't like that at all. She was a childhood friend, but I was just very interested in her as a person. She had this great journalism career. She had already started working for the New York Times at that point, and then she just disappeared. And then a year later, in the pages of the Riverdale Press, I see an obituary for Marina Lockman. And tragically enough, the obituary right under that, I believe, or it was around the same time period, within a week or so, was an obituary of another friend of mine, Regan Park, who jumped out a window and killed himself from his 11-story building. And he wasn't a good friend of mine, but he was definitely a good acquaintance. And so that that was sad for me, of course, but not nearly as sad as for Marina's parents and of course Regan's parents. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to put out there in the modern internet age the name Marina Lockman, because she was a brilliant journalist and someone who really her name should be forever enshrined in history. And so I'm hoping that with this series, at least we'll get a little bit of that out there now. So this article here is all about, the $600,000 that the Dodge family grant gave, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't really deserve us to read the whole thing. I'll post this again as well in the in my Twitter. So Moet asks, well, why did he kill himself? Well, I wish I knew, but I do remember seeing him about a week before he killed himself, walking around Riverdale looking disheveled. And Regan, if you knew him, he was a Korean dude. He never looked disheveled. He was a skater kid. He was always at the top of his game in terms of his style. He was actually quite popular and personable as well. But I saw him walking around Riverdale with a disheveled suit on, with a tie that was undone. And I said, wow, Regan looks horrible. I should talk to him. And literally a week later, he had killed himself. So I don't think I could have saved his life. But boy, I do regret not having stopped my car and gotten out, and because I noticed that something was wrong with him. So here we have Alfred Howell again. Remember, I told you guys today's going to be a long show. We're getting deep. You can watch this in double speed. If you don't want to sit through this whole thing, you could watch it later in double speed, which actually I suggest, because I speak very clearly that you can understand everything in 2 times speed. But I don't want to give this subject short shrift. I want to be very deep and very meticulous with this, because I have questions about this damn case. I'm very, very concerned about this. My spidey sensors are going up. Something stinks about this case. And that's why I'm no longer calling it the murder of Alfred Hunt Howell. I'm calling it the strange death of Alfred Hunt Howell. Something happened that we don't know about and that I believe is being covered up. So here's Ruth Rhea Howell again. How many of you have a picture of yourself like this? I would venture to say that the answer is very, very few of us have paintings of ourselves like this. And this is another example of why I'm calling these people American royalty, the true deep state. So here we go. Ruth Rhea Howell marries Alfred Howell. And again, huge thanks to my girl Ruby out there. Without Ruby, this presentation would have been a lot less interesting. Okay, so New York City crime spots in the house. Cleveland, I see this is exactly what we need in real time. I see Professor Hamamoto's in the house and Eric Galati's in the house. And we have 71 people watching, so welcome. Participate, including you guys who hate my guts. I know you're watching this right now. In fact, you guys are more obsessed with me than the people who, who like me. So come around. Let's be friends. Forget about Son of Sam. You guys got played by Maury Terry. I mean, just admit it, internalize it, be cool with it, and move on in life and join the fun because we're all having fun on this new case now. We're not really looking back. But Ruth Rhea Howell marries, so Cleveland Dodge, you guys can all read that. Thank you very much, New York City Crime Spot. My man, you should check out his channel. He does great work in the New York City mafia space and the cold case space and all that kind of stuff. So Pittsburgh girl becomes bride of New Yorker at summer home of her parents. All right, so we're not talking about poor people here. We are talking about the granddaughter of Mrs. Cleveland H. Dodge, bridegroom, son of banker. So that's Alfred Hunt Howell they're talking about. All right. So announcement has been made here in the marriage of Mrs. Ruth Rhea, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. James Child Rhea of Pittsburgh, to Alfred Hunt Howell, son of Mr. and Mrs. Alfred C. Howell of 815 Park Avenue. So Alfred Hunt Howell grew up on Park Avenue, all right? Rich dude, which took place Saturday at Baco Bill's, the summer home in Rector, Pennsylvania of the bride's parents. All right, so we're talking about serious money. The bride, a granddaughter of Mrs. Cleveland H. Dodge of Riverdale on Hudson, this city, and the late Mr. Dodge and Mrs. William Holdership Rhea of Pittsburgh. All right, so there was a Dodge in Riverdale and a Dodge in Pittsburgh as well. So genealogists, do your thing, right? So after a brief wedding trip, the couple will make their home in Bedford Hills, New York, still to this day an extremely exclusive community. Bedford Hills is where serious money is. Okay, so the bride whose mother, so Ruth Rhea Howell, this woman right here, her mother was Julia Dodge, and she was introduced to society here in the autumn of 1935 at a dinner dance given by her uncle and aunt, Mr. and Mrs. Cleveland E. Dodge, at their Riverdale home. All right. So here we have more. The bridegroom, a grandson of Mrs. Azor R. Hunt of Pittsburgh, and the late Colonel Hunt of the late Mr. and Mrs. Joseph K. Howell of this city. He belongs to Squadron A and is with the Citibank Farmers Trust Company. So Citibank Farmers Trust, is that Citibank? Again, I don't know these things. I need help out there with these things. Is this the Rockefeller Citibank? I'm not quite sure. Okay. His father is the vice president of the Guarantee Trust Company of New York. So Alfred Hunt Howell was American royalty. He was blue blood. He was son of major bankers. His wife was the granddaughter of major people. And also, interestingly enough, and this is where a lot of conspiratard maniacs brought me into this, thinking that I was a Satanist. That she was she wrote a book called The Dome People. And I talked about this in my now taken offline video about Mr. Real Estate and Alfred Hunt Howell back when I believed that claptrap. Okay. When I first started my Son of Sam series, I did a video on this guy that was very obscure. And I talked about this dome, this geodesic dome in Seton Park here in Riverdale, and we'll talk more about that. And we're going to look at Google Earth a little bit later today. And I had mentioned that the architect of the geodesic dome in Riverdale was a guy named Richard Stein. Well, there's the Riverdale Press again. Okay. This is an incestuous neighborhood, as I'm finding out researching this story. I didn't even realize all of these people are connected. Okay. As we're going to see. So Richard Stein, now I'm not saying anything untoward about Richard Stein. In fact, I like the guy. He was my editor at the Riverdale Press. He was a nice guy to me. He treated me with respect. He treated my father with respect because my father was known in the neighborhood as a guy who was involved in politics and with the local politicians and all that kind of stuff. This guy was, I'm not saying anything untoward. What I'm trying to do here is making connections between the elite tastemakers of Riverdale. And as it's turning out, Riverdale, and I never knew this before, seemingly was a nest, to use Maury Terry's term, was a nest of, in my opinion, deep state operatives. Not calling Richard Stein, and the only reason I'm bringing Richard Stein into this is because he was the architect of this very strange project that, as we're going to see, was financed by people within the Ruth Rhea Howell orbit. So here we go, right? I had a multifaceted career: architect, graphic designer, and community newspaper publisher. So way back in 1971, I was the first to convince the New York City Building Department to approve the construction of a geodesic dome, once built entirely by teenage volunteers on an overgrown and rubble-strewn Bronx lot. Now, he's being very hyperbolic here because it was not an overgrown and rubble-strewn Bronx lot. I guess technically it was. But this was built in the former estate of Elizabeth Seton Hospital, and it was anything but a Bronx lot. This was a very beautiful part of the neighborhood, and it's just kind of interesting that he would use that terminology. So I looked a little bit more into this dome thing, and the reason why I brought it up is because I remember being in this dome. They knocked it down in 1977, but I remember specifically being in this dome, and this is where the conspiratard maniac said, see, he was part of a satanic cult. He was a baby born into Satanism at a young age because he was in the geodesic dome. No, I have no idea why I was in there. Maybe a babysitter brought me there. I asked my parents. They don't have any recollection of taking me there, but they would often take me to Seton Park, where this dome was, in my stroller as in the 70s. I do remember being in there. I remember seeing the colored triangular plastic pieces that they used. I remember seeing kids in there hanging out. I have no clue why I was in that geodesic dome, but I was in that geodesic dome. And here's a picture of it from an article from 1972. I don't know why it says 1901 here. Sorry. Here's a picture of it right here. Okay. Of them building it. Youth is served with schools and a place of its own. At home in the dome. Now, the reason why I want to bring this up again is because we are trying to build connections in this story between institutions and people, because I personally think it's very important for us. Okay. So, here we go. By contrast, Riverdale Neighborhood House Seton Park Dome project seemed to be accomplished instantaneously. It was the brainchild of youth worker Pizer Edelsack. He was enamored of geodesic domes as a counterculture symbol, and he was betting that the opportunity to build one would lure teenagers away from their hangouts on Johnson Avenue and the Monument. Mr. Edelstack and Richard Stein, the guy who we just saw before, the architect of it, right here, Richard Stein, okay? So Mr. Edelstack and Richard Stein, a just graduated architecture student who later became the publisher of the Riverdale Press. Remember, institutions, guys. If you're interested in this story, you should be writing down Riverdale Neighborhood House, Riverdale Press, Pizer Edelsack, Richard Stein, all of these things, because we're going to try to make connections here, right? Convince the board of Riverdale Neighborhood House that the teens could build a dome themselves at minimal cost and could house a wide variety of teen activities. Okay. Ironically, so anyway, we're gonna not read that, but ironically, by the time Seton Park opened in 1976, the dome had run its course. Parks Department restrictions on its use, budget restrictions, and management changes at the Riverdale Neighborhood House made it untenable, and by 1977, it was demolished. Now, I'm going to tell you the truth about the geodesic dome and why it was demolished. It was demolished because it became a drug haven. All right. This was 1976, 1975, 77. The kids would go in there and yeah, they left the Monument and Johnson Avenue hangouts and they would all hang out in there and do acid, weed, get drunk as skunks. Okay, so they tore it down in the neighborhood because it became a total spot for degeneracy, right? So anyway, here's Pizer Idlesack. I expected to find some countercultural hippie looking dude, right? But no, this guy looks just like one of these eyes wide shut people. And this is his obituary. He's dead now, unfortunately. But it's with profound sadness that we announce the passing of Pizer Edelsack, longtime friend and colleague of Project Find, as well as the husband of Susan Cole, the chairperson of our board of directors. So here's another organization that we need to find out about, Project Find. Right. And here we go. Earlier in his career here as a youth worker for the Riverdale Neighborhood House. There's that thing again, the Riverdale Neighborhood House. He directed teens in building the first geodesic dome sanctioned by the New York Department of Buildings. Born in Los Angeles in 1943, he graduated from UCLA. So Professor Hamamoto, can I get a say what? Before joining the Peace Corps, working with farmers and villagers in a remote corner of India. So he was involved in all sorts of stuff, Charles Wang, alternative learning space. So Pizer Edelsack is a member of this whole orbit of Alfred Hunt Howell. And I think it's just important that we put these relationships on record. They may mean nothing, they may mean something, but as researchers into this case, you will know ye by the company you keep. All right. And I truly believe that. So here's the Riverdale Press. So this is the newspaper that Richard Stein was the editor of. This is the newspaper that Marina Lockman wrote for. This was the newspaper that I wrote for a brief period in 6 months. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But here's the name Riverdale Neighborhood House again. Okay. In 1950, journalist David Stein volunteered to produce a newsletter for Riverdale Neighborhood House. Something to help the fundraising effort for a new community swimming pool. The newsletter proved to be so popular that Dave became convinced that he and his wife, Seal, who wrote the obituary for Alfred Hunt Howell. So this woman later wrote the obituary for Alfred Hunt Howell that we saw, shown here in their old office in Central Riverdale, should create a newspaper. Okay. With the help of Riverdale Neighborhood House, they did just that. The press is now in its 8th decade of publication. Though we've received our share of accolades, we are in awe that Riverdale Neighborhood House has accomplished in 150 years of service. Okay. So the Riverdale Press was essentially a creature, in my opinion, of the Riverdale Neighborhood House. And I remember going to the Riverdale Neighborhood House as a kid to swim. It was like a place where kids went. Okay. Why are these people always interested in kids? Again, I'm just asking that question. I'm not saying anything, but Alfred Hunt Howell seemed very interested in kids. These people seem very interested in children and teenagers. All right. Again, I don't know for sure what's going on here, but Riverdale Neighborhood House in the researching this story is like one of the central spokes on the wheel of these people. Okay. So more information is better than less information. And remember, we are going deep in this series. We're taking all the powers that we learned about in Son of Sam, and we're applying it here. So, of course, the Riverdale Press was also known as was also famous for being firebombed in 1989, allegedly because they wrote an editorial praising the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. There was a local book place called Paperbacks Plus that was selling the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. And for those of you who are my age, close to 50, Gen X, you remember that that book was very controversial, and that, in fact, Salman Rushdie was just stabbed recently for writing that book. And I don't know exactly what happened to him, if he's still alive or not. But the Riverdale Press wrote an editorial in praise of the paperbacks plus the bookstore selling this book. And as a consequence, they were firebombed in 1989, and it became a huge story. So here we actually see again Richard Stein, the same guy who built the geodesic dome, with his mother, Seal Stein, who we saw in this picture here, right over here. Okay. 40 years after starting the newspaper, her creation was firebombed. And there's Buddy Stein, who's a big deal in New York journalism right now. He almost fired me, I remember. When I was working for the Riverdale Press, I accidentally plagiarized an article because I wasn't a trained journalist, and I had no clue that you couldn't just lift a blurb from something and put it in the newspaper. And I did that by accident, not knowing anything, and he got livid. You plagiarized. That's the biggest thing that you can't do. I should fire you, but I'm not going to, because, well, we know your dad. You're a known person in the neighborhood. We're going to give you another chance. So Buddy Stein here with his brother Richard, I have nothing bad to say about them. Absolutely nothing. Of course, the only thing that I wonder about is this very communistic hand and fist. We will not be silenced. The Riverdale Press 1985 firebombing, right? This was done in 2019, when the newspaper had already gone into different hands, and it was run by a guy named Michael Hinman, who is one of the most despicable people I've ever met in my life. Absolute horror show. He was the editor of the Riverdale Press, a total left-wing, probably Soros funded. I don't know that for a fact, but he just seemed to be that type of person. And so I'm not surprised that the communist fist was in here. But now I'm wondering, did they fake this firebombing? Like, is this like self-inflicted? Why weren't other places being firebombed back then for supporting the satanic verses? But that's just my conspiratorial mind having a field day. I have no proof of that. So back to Ruth Rhea Howell. Again, we have more proof here in her genealogy that she was associated with the Dodge family. And we're going to get into the Dodge family very soon. So for those of you wondering about, well, how come you're not talking about the crime yet? We have a whole series to talk about the crime, and we will talk about the crime at the end of today's show, the beginnings of that investigation at the end of today's show. But we are laying the foundation. We are showing who these people are in order to gain a greater understanding of the social forces that may have been in play in and around not only the death of Alfred Hunt Howell, but in the subsequent investigation. I have questions. Something stinks. So here we have Julia Parrish Dodge Rhea. Okay, so that's the mother of Ruth Rhea Howell. So this is Alfred Hunt Howell's mother-in-law, Julia Parrish Dodge Rhea. Okay, these people loved having these long names, right? But the reason why I'm interested in this is because of the name Parrish. And I'm interested in the name Parrish because one of the sons of Alfred Hunt Howell and Ruth Rhea Howell is Henry Parrish Howell. Okay. So I'm wondering, all right, Henry Parrish, that is a very obscure name. They must have taken that name from somewhere. So I typed in Henry Parrish into the internet, and I came up with, and I don't know whether these people are related at all. Okay. Again, we need genealogy work in this. I'm putting out the call just like I put out in my Son of Sam work. And I do have critics that say, man, he steals stuff. He takes people's information and doesn't give any credit. I want you not only to be a part of this, you're going to be credited. I already credited Ruby and Book Club at the beginning of this. I love when people help me, and I love giving credit. Never have not done that. Okay. But Henry Parrish dies in his 88th year. Now check this out. 44 years as a foe of innovation. 88, 44. I don't know, Professor Hamamoto. Is there something suspicious about the numerology here? Now, I don't want to get conspiratard, right? But I have heard that aces and eights, 11s and eights are big to these people. 88. And now we have 44, right? 44 caliber killer. I mean, I'm not making these connections. I just wanted to point that out because it will be pointed out. So I want to be the first one. But here we have the guy with the same name as Alfred Hunt Howell's son, who's another one of these banker dudes, right? Heavily rich, heavily involved in deep finance. His wife, Mrs. Henry Parrish, was the cousin and godmother of Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. Okay. So Professor Hamamoto, if you're still out there, are you interested in a show on this? Right? Because I talked to you about bringing this to your audience earlier, and I think that this is something very interesting. So Mrs. Henry Parrish herself was heavily old school, a member of an old New York family. Mrs. Parrish was born at Tivoli on Hudson. Her parents were the late E. Livingston and Margaret F. Ludlow. All right. So if you know anything about the history of New York, Livingston and Ludlow are major names. So here we have a person, Henry Parrish Howell, who's the child of Alfred Hunt Howell and Ruth Rhea Howell. He's named after a dude whose wife was the godmother of Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the first ladies. So Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt will receive jewelry, silver, and 1/4 of a substantial estate left by her kinswoman and godmother, Mrs. Susan Ludlow Parrish. Mrs. Parrish, who died July 9th, was the widow of wealthy banker Henry Parrish and had homes in Manhattan and West Orange, New Jersey. Okay? And as Ruby points out here, Alfred's father's name is Henry. So we have to figure out, like, well, here we have Julia Parrish. So the thing that we have to connect now is we have to see if the Parrishes were related in any way to the Howells. Okay. So this is something that the genealogists have to do out there. And again, I'm making the point, and I'm starting to make it now. Well, before we show you that these people are American royalty, that these are deep state people. These are the people who actually run the United States. These are the people who hold the strings of the politicians and tell them what to do. These are the people who fund the local newspapers and influence what they write. These are the people who create the foundations which fund all these projects. Some are good, right? But we're gonna look that there's a seamy underside to this. And I think that that's one of the things that attracts me so much to this case, because we are talking about the seamy underside, potentially, of my own neighborhood. And as they always suggest to people who are doing any sort of artistic project, write what you know. Work on what you know. I knew Son of Sam, and I know this neighborhood. So this is why I'm doing this this case. So here we have another tantalizing bit of work here. So Janet Howell. Okay, so here we have Howell. She's the wife of Alfred Hunt Howell Jr., Alfred Hunt Howell's son. Okay. And she is a member of the Virginia Senate from the 32nd District. She's been in office since 1991, so she's been there forever, right? And she was born to Edward Fulton and Elsie Dennison. And the word Dennison is going to become important later. So please write down the name Dennison. But Hunt Howell is with this group called the Inter-American Development Bank. And I was trying to look up the Inter-American Development Bank. Again, this is all, in my opinion, getting into the deep state here. And what it is, it's a bank that was developed in, I think, the late 1800s to provide money to develop Latin America. Well, we know how that goes, right? Like, anytime that the United States goes into Latin America, especially in the early 1900s to the 1950s, a lot of people end up slaughtered and killed. I mean, this is not cool. This development, in my opinion, and this is, again, my opinion here. Development is just another word for taking over the resources of a country. So here you have a woman, Howell, with a middle name Dennison. Okay, we're going to look at Janet Dennison Howell. That name is interesting to me. Okay, we're gonna see why later. Okay, whose husband is on the Inter-American Bank, or was with the Inter-American Bank, which again, you researchers out there, I need help. We need to learn about these things more. She's been in office in Virginia for a long, long time. Okay, and although she doesn't look like one of these blue bloods, she really doesn't. She looks like actually someone, I don't know, not of high stock, but she's involved with these people. She is the wife of, well, she's Hunt Howell's granddaughter, daughter-in-law. Okay, so let's get back to this whole notion of, are these people American royalty? Who were these people? So let's look a little bit more at the Dodge Foundation. Okay, so we have already talked about a few things in this neighborhood of Riverdale, which most people would just look at and say, okay, no big deal. Riverdale Neighborhood House, the Dodge Foundation, geodesic domes, Pizer Edelsack, and so on and so forth. Not a big deal. Well, I don't know. Let's look at the Dodge Foundation a little bit more. So Alfred Hunt Howell's, as we learned earlier, he was on the board of directors of the Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation. And as we know, his wife, Ruth Rhea Howell, was a member of the Dodge family. Well, here is the Dodge Foundation's website, very innocuous sounding, the establishment of the found, but those of you out there with a discerning ear, an eye, and I'm talking to Eric, I'm talking to Professor Hamamoto, I'm talking to all of you out there, but I know that this is right up Eric and Professor Hamamoto's alley. The establishment of the foundation was the culmination of the life of Cleveland H. Dodge. It continues his deep belief in philanthropy through his descendants. His intention was to create an outlet for his children, grandchildren, and generations beyond to carry on his financial support for and encourage their service to worthy organizations. His was a life immersed in the ideals of philanthropy, service, and family. At the center of his many business activities, Phelps Dodge and Company Incorporated, a major copper mining and manufacturing company, flourished under his leadership. Cleveland's successful professional career was only a small part of his life. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. Family was important to him, and so on and so forth. But here we go. Cleveland is well known for his lifelong friendship with President Woodrow Wilson. Now, I come out of the conspiracy world. I come out of the land that went up, out of the milieu, that when you see Woodrow Wilson, your antenna go up. Okay? Woodrow Wilson, of course, got us into World War I, which we had no business of being in World War I whatsoever, in my opinion. He was the president where they started the Federal Reserve System. And we know that Samuel Untermeyer was part of that whole Federal Reserve System at the beginning of it. So here we have this guy Dodge, whose granddaughter is Alfred Howell's wife, okay, and whose foundation is just given $600,000 out to New York Botanical Garden. His foundation, as we're going to see, is involved in the Riverdale Neighborhood House and all this stuff. Here he has, in his own biography, he was a longtime friend of President Woodrow Wilson. Their relationship manifested itself with a strong interest in foreign affairs, particularly during the First World War. Like his father and grandfather, Cleveland had a deep interest in the Near East. He became a leading advocate for the victims of World War I. Yeah, the victims of the very war that him and his ilk probably started. Okay, and particularly victims of the Armenian genocide. So this is interesting because Alfred Hunt Howell was involved in the Cedar organization, the Something of Lebanon, right? So again, here we have in their own words, on the Cleveland Dodge website, things that will raise the hackles of most people who know a little bit about the American deep state. This guy was definitely American royalty. And oh, looky here. Here's an article that came out in the late 60s. And I showed this once on my Son of Sam, when I was looking at this group called Catholics for Latin America, and I posited that it was a CIA front. I have walked that back. The truth is I never was able to prove that. I pissed off a lot of people by saying it. I'm not apologizing for it, but I'm walking that back. But the CIA and the foundations, research organization lists agencies, dummies, and conduits. Okay, so a series of disclosure during the week of February 1924 linked a number of organizations in the field of law, journalism, labor, education, and religion to the Central Intelligence Agency. The disclosures had begun February 13th when the National Student Association, NSA, NSA announced it had been receiving funds from the CIA since 1952. Press reports have identified a total of 46 foundations believed to have been linked between the CIA and organizations receiving CIA funds. These foundations generally fell into three categories. One, CIA dummy foundations set up by the CIA to give CIA funds directly to certain organizations or channel CIA funds to establish foundations, which then served as conduits by giving the money to CIA designated organizations. Two, suspected CIA dummies, which if they were not dummies, were cooperating with the CIA in some capacity. And three, established foundations serving as conduits for CIA money channeled to them, usually through dummy foundations. All right, so we have three potential organizations here linked to the CIA. Now, suspected CIA dummies. So we go through this list. And, well, CIA cooperators are here. That seems like a little bit more important to me. And look at what we find here. The Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation, 300 Park Avenue, New York. Cleveland E. Dodge president. Okay. And here we have, as part of another article that I found, CIA cooperators. MD Anderson Foundation, Appalachia Fund, David Josephine and Winfield Baird Foundation, J. Frederick Braun Foundation, Catherwood Foundation, and oh, look at what we find here. The Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation. $6.2 million. Grants last year of record. $410,000. Purpose, to promote the well-being of man. That's pretty general to me. To assist certain charitable and educational organizations, chiefly in the Near East, Christian associations, and special war and relief funds. So these people, the Cleveland Dodge Foundation was, in my opinion, if this is true, them being a CIA cooperator, they were using this foundation as a front to do whatever deep state activity they wanted to do in the Near East, even here in the United States. And I just want to point out that I am not suicidal. I love life. I have no interest in killing myself, and I'm just putting that out there. And I'm kind of joking about it, but I do want to put on record that I am not suicidal. Okay. So Dodge Foundation is majorly connected, most likely, a CIA dummy foundation. Now, here we have some other local people who lived in and around the same area as Howell, who were involved in similar activity. So the Kerlin connection, okay, Kerlin. So Mr. Howell suffered a fatal, so this is again from his obituary from the Riverdale Press, written by Celia Stein, okay, the woman who was the, started the Riverdale Press with Riverdale Neighborhood House money. Remember, Riverdale Neighborhood House, Riverdale Press. Her son built the geodesic dome with Pizer Idlesack, who was involved in all sorts of, strange organizations, looks like one of the members of the Eyes Wide Shut crowd, and so on and so forth. So, Franz is saying here, let's just get some people involved. Manny sounds like Vietnam era CIA ops. Yes. Here we have Sam Smith saying foundations were also big in funding the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic. Actually, the person who did one of the greatest studies of the foundation world was a researcher by the name of Webster Tarpley. And he wrote a great book called Barack Obama, the Unauthorized Biography. And I highly recommend you get that book if you want to read more about foundations, because he writes about the Ford Foundation in there, about how this very, very huge foundation called the Ford Foundation was instrumental in a very socially destructive project in Brownsville, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, Brooklyn, which was involved with creating like black only schools, and it pitted the Jewish teachers against the black liberation theologists, and the effects of that actually was one of the things that fractured Jewish and black relations in New York City, and the effects of that are still felt to this day. So that happened in the late 60s. And yeah, Ford Foundation, always mentioned on PBS. And that book, a New York City Crime Spot, coming up with some stuff. The Dodge family seems also to be connected to the Rockefellers through marriage. So, right, we're not talking about here Alfred Hunt Howell, some random old man found dead in his upstairs bedroom. We're talking about a member potentially of American royalty, the deep state, right? Something stinks about this. But getting back to Webster Tarpley, you should check that book out big time, because it also talks about the Weathermen and about how these creatures, Bernadette Dorn and what's the other guy's name? I forget his name. Both benefactors of Obama, who comes out of the foundation world himself. How the father was I forget the guy's name. Somebody put it in the man who was involved with the Weathermen. I'll know it as soon as I see it. It's on the tip of my tongue. But his father in Chicago was a major industrialist. Again, Bernadette Dorn and the other freak, Bill Ayers. Correct, Bill Ayers. Yes, the father of Bill Ayers was a major industrialist in Chicago, connected to CIA most likely. And of course, Simone is saying the Clinton Foundation is corrupt as it goes, the Soros Foundation behind all the color revolutions. Yes, so I'm speaking to an educated audience. This is good. And the reason why this is good is because you guys are already in real time making these connections between the unknown information. All of this that I'm showing to you here was unknown to us. And now we're connecting this guy, Alfred Hunt Howell, to the major players of the deep state. But let's get back to Alfred Hunt Howell's friends. So Mr. Howell suffered a heart attack in his Riverdale home. So here we have this guy, Gilbert Kerlin, laying the foundation of his death, right? Heart attack, Riverdale home. According to his longtime friend and neighbor, Gilbert Kerlin. He was 83. So I looked a little bit more at this Gilbert Kerlin guy, and here we see the same organizations, Wave Hill, ready to write history's newest chapters. It was all made official on November 4th, 1965. City Park Commissioner Newbold Morris arranges paper for the official signing, creating what would become Wave Hill. Now, Wave Hill, again, is a local public garden created at this time in 1965 that is majorly run by, to this day, the Eyes Wide Shut crowd. I was trained at Wave Hill as a gardener. I was part of the John Nally internship. Okay. And of course, conspiratard maniacs are going to say, see, Manny's involved. Manny's a child of all this, trying to whitewash it all. No, I'm a son of a dude who worked for a PR guy and a stay-at-home mom. And I'm a very lowly gardener, underemployed, completely not living up to my potential. And the reason why I think that is because actually these deep staters, when I was at Wave Hill, they hated my guts. At NYBG, they hated my guts. And I was, of course, fired for my political beliefs, canceled, if you will. So I'm not a part of these people. I despise these people, in fact. Okay. But here we go. Joined by Bronx Borough President Joseph Perricone and Wave Hill Incorporated Chair Gilbert Kerlin. Okay. Now, also joining on the far left are Dorothy Parker Freeman, daughter of former Wave Hill owner George W. Perkins, and her husband Edward Freeman. Behind them are U.S. Representative Jonathan Bingham, Corporation Counsel David Cranker, and Riverdale Community Association Vice President John Mack. All right, so let's look a little bit about Gilbert Kerlin and his connections. Okay, so Gilbert Kerlin was the president of the Riverdale Community Planning Association at the time, and in late 1963 formed a group of local leaders and city officials known as Wave Hill Incorporated. Their plans became public in November, just weeks before the world was rocked by the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Okay, now, so there's Kerlin. Now, looky here. This is from another article, which we're going to look at in a second. The Family Art Project, this is at Wave Hill. They fund art projects, is generously sponsored by Target with additional support provided by the Cleveland Dodge Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. Sustaining support is provided by the Sally and Gilbert Kerlin Endowment for Environmental Science and Nature Education. So here we have in the same sentence, Kerlin and Dodge being associated together. All right. So are Kerlin and Dodge connected? Well, again, here we have that also. The Family Art Project is generally sponsored by Target with additional support by Cleveland Dodge and the Sally Kerlin Endowment. So what they do is they support these artworks at Wave Hill, which in my opinion, now I have nothing against Leah Chang. I have no idea who she is. Okay. But I worked at Wave Hill and I have a good eye for good art. Okay. This is not good art. This is garbage right here. Okay. So it goes back to the whole thing of these foundations sponsoring culture wrecking projects, sponsoring projects which on the surface seem like good, altruistic, but which in reality destroy culture. I mean, this is not art that we're seeing right here. This is a picture of a couple of mirrors placed rather poorly, actually, on a pedestal here in a room. And God knows what this is: horns being, tied together from hanging from a ceiling. I mean, what is this, right? And as Simone Nyman says here, modern art is subversive part of CIA agenda. I completely agree with you, Simone. Wait, here Sam Smith wrote something. George Perkins, he was the financial sponsor of the far-left Lansbury clan who moved to New York from London. Angela Lansbury's daughter, Dee Dee, would later become a member of the Manson clan. So, Sam Smith, you're making connections. That's good. And remember, tomorrow I'll be talking with Nicholas Schreck about Manson. So maybe some of you guys can get into this. But getting back to Kerlin and Dodge supporting these, well, crappy art projects. And I got to tell you something, guys. Like I said, I got nothing against Leah Chang. I have no idea who she is, other than that she was financed by the Cleveland Dodge Foundation and the Gilbert and Sally Kerlin Foundation, right? This is crap. And I have never seen, and I've been to Wave Hill my entire life. I worked there for 1 year. I saw a lot of these art installations. They were all similarly absolute garbage. All right. So maybe there is something to Simone's previous comment about them providing funding for culture wrecking projects. But here's the seamy underside of this guy, Kerlin, right? Here he is creating Wave Hill, right? We'll talk about that in a second because we're going to look at the neighborhood. Here he is supporting art projects. Well, here's the reality of Gilbert Kerlin. Jury, Mexican-American family cheated. A South Texas jury has found a New York lawyer cheated a Mexican-American family out of millions of dollars in mineral royalties after a disputed land deal 68 years ago. The jury Wednesday ordered Gilbert Kerlin, a 90-year-old Bronx lawyer and businessman, to pay $1 million in compensatory damages. Okay. The 225 heirs of Juan Jose Bali are asking for $11 million in punitive damages from Kerlin, who purchased most of the Padre Island on the South Texas coast from the family in a 1938 land deal. Lawyers for the Bali heirs argue that Kerlin made millions from Padre's mineral resources and recreational developments, and the heirs should have received a share of his profit. The land in dispute was granted to Padre Nicholas Bali in 1765 by King Carlos III, and he later willed it to his nephew. All right, so here we go. Okay. Kerlin who's supposedly doing all of these great deals. He's creating things for the community with Wave Hill, and he's signing all these things, and he's supporting artwork, right? The simple fact is he's cheating Mexican Americans out of millions of dollars, right? Like, he's stealing their land, he's stealing he's stealing their mineral resources. Again, the seamy underside of Riverdale, this neighborhood in which Alfred Hunt Howell was found dead mysteriously in his home in 1996. Now, here's something that's interesting only because of the name Dennison. And I want to preface this because, well, look who wrote this obituary, right? I wrote this obituary for the Riverdale Press when I was a reporter there. Now, I want to talk about my tenure at the Riverdale Press so the conspiratards don't have a field day. I used to be a musician. I used to run a company called Kettles and Company. You could look it up. It still exists to this day. I ran it for a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Haas. Jonathan Haas hired me to run his company because he needed just a competent person to do the day-to-day activities. He was a working musician, and he owned this amazing company that rented percussion instruments to various groups in Manhattan and in the New York City region. He rented percussion instruments, and because I was a drummer, I had gotten involved in this after college, and I ended up running this guy's company. Okay, I started in 1998, and I left in 2007. Okay, again, here is 2007, just so you can prove what I said, right? This article was written in 2007. I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do in life. I had no clue. So actually, weirdly enough, to make my father proud of me for the first time in life, because he was appalled at my musicians, like he thought that I was wasting myself working for this company. To make him happy, to maybe have him feel a little bit of pride in me, I went up to the Riverdale Press and I asked for a job as a reporter. I had no experience whatsoever, but they hired me on, and they saw that I knew how to write. And actually, within a month, I was writing the entire newspaper. If you look at episodes or publications from those months, I was only there 6 months. I wrote literally almost every article. Okay, so I was working there a lot. I got a lot of experience, and I absolutely hated working for the Riverdale Press. Right? I already knew truth back then. I knew that the liberal elite was horrendous. Democrats were killing New York City. I knew about false flags. I knew about all of this stuff. And I just felt like the environment of the newsroom was extremely toxic to truth. And so I lasted 6 months before I quit. I left. All right. But within that 6 months, I was meeting some very interesting people. And I ended up at this guy, Denny Dennison's house, and wrote his obituary. Now, I must say that Denny Dennison was a gentleman. I was on the community board here in Riverdale as well for a few months. And he was on the community board, which is a semi-governmental quasi-governmental board, which has some sort of advisory power to the local politicians. Quite frankly, the community board in Riverdale was very powerful because it was headed by these guys right here. But Denny Dennison was always a gentleman to me. I never saw him do anything untoward. I never heard any rumors negative about him, nothing. He was the nicest guy to me personally. We never got into anything deep. And when he died, I wrote his obituary because I felt that personal connection to him for having worked with him on the community board. So I went down to his house. His wife was a gracious woman, totally nice to me, let me in her house, spoke to me for about an hour, and I wrote this obituary. Okay. But what interests me about Dennison is getting back to this over here. Janet Dennison Howell. Okay. Now it's spelled with one N instead of two, but I gotta wonder if there's a connection here. If somehow or other there's a connection to the Dennison family, which was involved, as we're going to see, with all the same cast of characters. Now, check this out. So here he is. He was involved with Community Board 8. Let's see if there's any other familiar names here. Well, he counted among his contemporaries Gilbert Kerlin, right? So we just learned that now his friend was Gilbert Kerlin, was the last of the old guard of Riverdale, of which Alfred Hunt Howell and the Dodge family were deeply connected. All right. He was the last of the old guard. He was friends with Gilbert Kerlin. And together with these men, Mr. Dennison led some of the earliest struggles concerning zoning and land use in Riverdale, and it was in many ways responsible for the look of modern Riverdale. We'll talk about that when we look at Google Earth. So here he is involved with Gilbert Kerlin. Oh, look, former president of the Riverdale Neighborhood House. Okay. So he's involved with these same organizations that all these other people are involved with. And even further, with a second child on the way, the Dennisons moved to Riverdale in 1946. They found out about the community from Francis's mother. Francis was his wife. Okay. This guy Dennison was married to a woman named Francis. Francis's mother was a friend of Pauline Dodge, or Madame Riverdale, as Mrs. Dennison described her. The Dodges were among Riverdale's most illustrious families and landholders. So here we have a guy named Dennison, different spelling name, 2 N's instead of 1. His real full name was Ethan Allen Dennison. Okay, Ethan Allen, interesting right there. His wife was a friend of Pauline Dodge. He was involved with Gilbert Kerlin. Okay, he was involved in the Riverdale Neighborhood House. And also, it turns out that the land they lived on, okay, the Dodges parted with a small portion of that land in 1961, where Mr. Dennison, who felt a man should design his own house, created a brick and glass contemporary home. So these guys lived on the former Dodge property. So interesting people that this guy, Alfred Hunt Howell, was connected to. Let's take a look a little bit more at the neighborhood. Okay, give me a second here. All right. So as you know, I like to look at Google Earth to get an idea for this neighborhood. So real quick, we are now looking at an overview of the Riverdale section of the Bronx. Here's Van Cortlandt Park. Those of you who have been with me forever know Van Cortlandt Park. Okay. Give me a second here. Projects. Let me just get to projects. There we go. Okay. Right? Here's Untermeyer Park right up here. So far away. Okay. Now, Simone writes something good. All of these connections are insidious and keep the elite in power and able to maintain the status quo. I agree with you. Whereas I did not get conspiratorial in Son of Sam, I am more willing to go down that road in this investigation that we're doing now, because we are making provable connections to people who are involved with the CIA, the deep state. This is American royalty. I am truly thinking that these are the people who ran America, who may still run America, and we are exposing them. Okay. Again, I'm not suicidal, just putting that out there. So Professor Hamamoto, where does Sarah Lawrence College is in Yonkers. Okay. It's in Bronxville, Yonkers. It's not in the Bronx. It's close by to these places, but I haven't done enough research into that to be able to answer that at all. But anyway, here we go. So here, right here is the Riverdale section of the Bronx. I want to show you, we have just learned the name Dodge, Dennison, Kerlin, and Howell. Look at the neighborhood that they live in. Whoa, houses. Here's Wave Hill right here, okay, which they preserved. Okay. They created a thing called the Riverdale Natural Area District, which prevented large buildings from going into these wood areas. Now, I don't think that was very altruistic. I think that these guys were just using their power to protect their land from developers, right? So all of this stuff that we saw before with Kerlin signing Wave Hill into existence, which again is right over here. Wave Hill is right here, public garden, just like Untermeyer Park, public garden. Okay. I think that the seamy underside of that was that they didn't want their neighborhood to have buildings in it. So they created all of these zoning laws and used their political power to protect their own neighborhoods. So let's look at where these people lived. So first of all, here's the Howell home right here. And I'm not going to give the address. See it at some point in the in this. I'm going to do walk and talks on this, but I don't want to dox anyone, and I don't want anyone to even think about bothering the current owner. That's not what we're about. We're not into anything here other than learning information, making connections, explaining crimes, getting more insight into things. Okay. And Professor Howell, Professor Howell, sorry, Professor Hamamoto says, notice that the bankers like to live by the riverbanks, pirates. So there is something to that. Here's the famous Hudson River, right? So here's the Howell home right here. Okay. Here's where Dennison lived. Here's where Kerlin lived. And here's the famous Dodgewood Mansion. Okay. The home of Cleveland Dodge, the miner, the copper miner. This house is humongous. I'm going to do a walk and talk very soon where I walk through this neighborhood and I show you these things. I wanted to lay the foundation, right? I wanted to get the cast of characters down before I started showing you these places. But notice how the Dodgewood Mansion, remember the Dennison home was built on a portion of the Dodge estate. So that means that this Dodge estate here actually went all the way down to at least here at one point, which means that Kerlin's house, who we already have shown was connected to the Dodge Foundation. They supported the same arts stuff, and you just know they know each other. I mean, we don't have any proof, right? But you just know that they did. Again, I can make that assumption. I mean, they literally live right next door to each other, right? The Kerlin home is right on that Dodge property as well. And the Howell home is on the outskirts of it. So here we have what Maury Terry he called the heads of the Untermeyer cult, right? The Son of Sam cult in Untermeyer, the ridiculous bullcrap. He called that a nest, right? Up in Yonkers, up in North Broadway of Yonkers. In my opinion, this is a nest right here of serious deep state operatives, American royalty, the people who really run this place, this joint, the people whose grandfathers were the bankers, were the people involved with Woodrow Wilson and the creation of the Federal Reserve and World War I and copper mining in the Near East, and then their foundations are all involved in all sorts of weird, nefarious activity with the CIA, right? The Dodge Foundation connected to the CIA as a front. There's something up with all of this, and I personally think that it could have something to do with the strange aftermath of the death of Alfred Hunt Howell. Okay, so just showing you again, pulling out a little bit, I'll show you where the geodesic dome was. It was right down here, okay, in Seton Park. This was another former estate. You can't see it now because they tore it all down, but this was once a mansion here. Now it's just a public park, but the geodesic dome was right here. Okay. Not too far away, again, from the houses of all these people, all within very close walking distance. It looks far from here, but it really isn't that far. You're 5-6 minute walk away from each other. But I think that this is something interesting, which has never been talked about with relation to the death of Alfred Hunt Howell, and whether it has something to do with it or not, I don't know. Again, we are starting this endeavor together today. I'm super excited about it. I told you this is going to be a long show. We're not messing around. So we're not done. Of course, we still have quite a ways to go. So here we have all these people living together, and this really shows you, not only because we showed you on paper the connections that the Howells had with the Dodges and the Dennisons have with the Dodges and the Kerlins have with the Dodges. But I think the center of power was right here, and it emanated out to these 4 homes here. And God knows who lived in these homes that we haven't figured out yet. Okay. But this was a true nest of American royalty right here. The people who you never see, the true deep state, the people who really run the show. And in my opinion, continue to run the show today. because we have Alfred Hunt Howell's son as a head of Inter-American Development Bank, and his wife is a state senator. Okay, so again, the nest. All right, so let's get back to our slideshow, and let's carry on. So now this brings us, of course, to April of 1996. All right. So they find this guy dead in his apartment, in his house. And that was it, right? Here's a very staid and bland obituary in the New York Times, right? So on and so forth, saying the same thing that we talked about. Director and vice president of the Bronx-based Cleveland Dodge Foundation. Okay. And all of this stuff here, his wife, Ruth Rhea Howell. And we know that she's connected to the Dodges and all of this stuff. Well, 1 year later, give me 1 second. So 1 year later, something very weird happens. And it's reflected in these pictures here. All of a sudden, out of the blue, they arrest this guy, Nikolai Aman, who turns out to be a friend of mine from childhood. And we'll get into that in a second. Okay. For the murder of Alfred Hunt Howell. All of a sudden, it goes from a heart attack to a murder. Okay, and we remember our first slide of the day, and a perfect murder done by an imperfect murderer, which doesn't make any sense logically. And that should be your first clue as to something is up with this case. This case is very, very weird. I have never had my antenna go up before on a case such as I have with this case right here. I know something's up with this. There's something that we're not being told about this. But these were crime scene photographs. Okay, this door was open. The Acura was parked in this garage. All of a sudden, Nikolai, who is arrested for a robbery a year later in a town called Harrison, New York, which is nowhere near the Bronx. It's about half an hour away. All of a sudden, he starts talking about a murder at the Howell home, and he blames other people for it, right? And then all of a sudden, he confesses to the murder, that he did it. Something is weird about that, and that's where we're gonna look at more in later shows. Today, we're just laying the foundation. And to me, this is a very poignant photograph. Nikolai watched the house from here. Okay. So when I do my walk and talk, I'm going to start it from right here, where Nikolai watched the house from. And you can see the Hudson River and the Palisades. And those of you who've been with me from the beginning know that the Hudson and the Palisades are a constant visage in my video series. We entered through the house through the unlocked garage door, closed the garage door when we got in, right? So these very lonely, how the body was lying. Okay, the bed was right here. I guess they were doing renovations somehow or other. The toilet was out here. The body was lying right here, and so on and so forth. So these are crime scene photographs taken that are part of this file dump on the Alfred Hunt Howell murder, which I find so incredibly interesting. And of course, this is a police drawing done of the crime scene, and I want you guys out there to note that they have the body lying in a pool of blood. Remember that. Take that as a note. Write that down. Keep that in your memory banks. And I am noticing the chat, by the way. I'm so into what I'm doing right now that I'm not paying too much attention to the chat. But I do see that you guys are actually out there having the discussions that I want you to have. Okay? Just like the Royals marry to keep power in the family. Sam Smith is saying, wasn't it one of the Dodges who had an apartment in the Spire Chrysler building in Manhattan? Professor Hamamoto, always Mabel Dodge Lewin connects to the Taos arts community, Greenwich Village power, pre-war anarchist, right? So you guys, you getting into it. You are getting into it. And we have almost 80 people watching now, which is a great, great thing. Thank you so much for hanging with me. We still have quite a ways to go. So the candlestick and the candlesticks were here. All right. So rather stayed photographs, and here's a smattering of the articles that came out, so we can start to get an idea of what the newspapers were reporting at the time. So tycoon's heart attack looking like murder. Well, I don't understand how that can happen, but all right, let's just go through it. A Bronx millionaire who cops first thought died of a heart attack in 1996 might have been gunned down in his Riverdale mansion by an armed robber, the Daily News has learned. Forensic tests performed on Alfred Hunt Howell indicate that there were fragments of lead in his ashes, sources told the news. The lab tests were ordered after murder suspect Nikolai Aman confessed to investigators that he shot Howell after the 83-year-old millionaire surprised him as he was burglarizing the mansion. The forensic tests and Aman's confession raised serious questions about how police handled the initial investigation of his death. Police had concluded that Howell died of natural causes and released the body of the retired banker and philanthropist for cremation without an autopsy. So now we have a bunch of things to deal with here. First things first. They are using the presence of lead in his ashes to prove that he was shot. All right, so remember, he was supposedly shot, and they find lead in his ashes. This is going to become important later. So write this down in your notebook. Remember, I'm teaching a course here. This is not just entertainment. This is a PhD level course into one of the weirdest murder cases that I have ever come across in my life, far dwarfing in interest to me the pissant Son of Sam case. Son of who? Give me a break. Disco Dave did it. End of story. The rest of that other stuff is just noise created by a serial liar. Okay? And of course, his dumb followers to this day continue to insist that there was a cult, man. Look at this case, because this case is much more interesting to you guys out there in terms of all of this deep state stuff. Okay, so ashes in the lead in the ashes, I should say. They originally thought he died of a heart attack. He was shot. All right. And so we need to remember this stuff for later reference. And again, here's that quote. It appears to be the perfect murder committed by an imperfect murderer. That's not good there. That's a logical fallacy. This cannot be true in any way, shape, or form. By virtue of not knowing, so Hunt Howell, the victim's son, said he was aware of the suspect's confession, but was reluctant to comment on the investigation. By virtue of not knowing the implications of what I say, I want to be more circumspect than usual. Obviously, we were disappointed and disturbed that it didn't come to light earlier. Cops and detectives from the 50th Precinct went to Howell's stately home on the Hudson River on April 23rd, after the millionaire's body was found lying in blood in his bedroom, and an empty wallet on the bed did not raise the cops' suspicions. Howell appeared to have sustained a head injury, but because the cops found no evidence of forced entry to the mansion, they concluded that the man had suffered a heart attack and fallen on the floor. All right? So it turns out he was on blood thinners, and that's why there was a pool of blood and so on and so forth. But anyway, that's one article. Let's look at another, which is much more salacious. Chilling slay, then snack. Accused killer's account. So this is from the Daily News, okay? As the bullet-riddled body of millionaire Alfred Hunt Howell lay in a pool of blood in his Riverdale mansion, his accused killer calmly strode into the kitchen looking for something to eat. His eyes settled on a box of cookies, and one by one they disappeared into Nikolai Aman's mouth. His appetite sated, Aman gathered up some of the 83-year-old Howell's treasured belongings and walked away. All right, so we're not going to read this whole thing. I'm going to post these on my Twitter after today's show because I want to keep the flow of the show going. But there's certain things that I want you to take away from these articles. And you guys are already asking the right questions. Eric, how did the police conclude what they did when there was no autopsy? Great question. Heart attacks don't usually result in big pools of blood. Great observation, right? So suspect a pool of blood becomes a heart attack. Right. You guys are getting it. And now one thing to add to the mix, guys, is that the previous article didn't mention that he had a bullet-riddled body, as they're reporting here. It talked about the presence of lead in his ashes. But here they're taking it a step further. Bullet-riddled body. I want you to write this down. This is going to become very important. And look at this. The man tried to grab him, but the defendant kept firing until the man stopped moving. So Nikolai kept shooting this guy until the man stopped moving and blood was pouring out everywhere. Okay? That's a police statement. Blood was pouring out everywhere. Keep that in mind, folks. Okay, so here's just more articles. Bronx millionaire's death is ruled a homicide. The suspect admits to the crime in Harrison, New York, after he was arrested for burglary, saying he beat Howell with the candlestick while trying to learn where valuables were. So this doesn't talk anything about shooting. This talks about beating him with candlesticks. Okay. And then the question I have, of course, is why the hell would Nikolai Aman confess to this murder a year later when he was just arrested for a burglary? He should have he wasn't a stupid person. I knew Nikolai. He should have just kept his mouth shut. They would have never have known. They had buried this guy. They put him in the ground. In fact, they buried him without an autopsy, which is highly, highly unusual, I want to add. I read a book on the history of the New York City Medical Examiner's Office, and it said straight up that when a person dies of any suspicious, if they're alone in the house, if there's no witnesses to the death, if there's a question of any form, that an autopsy is mandatory. There was no autopsy in this case. The body was released right to the family where they cremated it right away. Does something strike you as wrong with that? There's something wrong with that. All right. And of course, here it says, although Howell had lacerations to his face, cops thought that the injuries were suffered in a fall, according to the spokesman, and no autopsy was performed. But then a year later, the cause of death was homicidal violence. So which is it? Okay, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So again, more articles which you guys can read. We're not going to go through each one for the purposes of time. I'm going to post these to my Twitter. Remember, we are taking a class, and I want you guys to be fully informed. So as the teacher of this class, and I hate to call myself that, but anyone could have done this research, but no one else did, so I had to do it. As the teacher of this class, I'm gonna put out the information for you guys to study, because we're not done. This is an investigation. We are starting a brand new crime, and we're taking it as far as we possibly can. So the Bronx man is charged with banker's death. So all of these will be on here. Let's see if there's anything in here that we need to. Here we go. So whereas the Daily News said that he was shot and bullet riddled, and he kept on shooting him until he stopped. This is just according to the indictment. Amman caused the death of Alfred Hunt Howell by striking him with a dangerous instrument. And here, of course, we have the Dodge Foundation again, Young Men's Christian. We have Van Cortlandt Park, and so on and so forth. So you guys starting to see the problems I have with this? Let's look a little bit more at Nikolai, shall we? So here's Nikolai Aman's mugshot for this crime, or maybe the burglary, I'm not sure. And I have to be honest, this really gets to me. This makes me emotional. Why? Because this is my childhood friend. This was a nice kid. He was a very sweet boy growing up. He showed no signs whatsoever, and he was not known in the neighborhood at all to be violent in any way. This is just facts. And what I'm hoping is people from the neighborhood who see this get inspired to get in touch with me, and let's reminisce about Nikolai. Let's talk about him, because I only knew him up to 6th grade. And the reason why I only knew him up to 6th grade is because he stole from my parents. I had a bedroom growing up that was right off the kitchen. And my father every week would put like $100 in a pouch from my mother, $100 cash, so like petty cash, so she could go out and buy groceries that she needed for the day-to-day living. Okay, Nikolai Aman came over to my house, and we were with a couple people. It wasn't just him. At some point, he must have gone out to the kitchen and stolen that money, because later that evening, my mom said, "Where's the money? Right? Show me the money. Where's the money?" And I said, What are you talking about?" She goes, "Our money's gone." And we just talked about it, and we realized that Nikolai stole it. And it was a huge shock, because remember, I grew up in Riverdale, sheltered, right? Now, Riverdale of the old days is not like the Riverdale later, where it became uber exclusive, and my neighborhood was still solidly middle class. There was a lot of, workers and whatever, but still, I was pretty sheltered compared to the rest of the Bronx. I'm going to just admit that. I could not believe that a friend of mine would do this. And my mother at that point expressly forbade me ever to associate with Nikolai Aman again. So I never ever saw this guy in socially ever after this. But he was still in my school, and I would see him all the time. He was the tallest kid in class. He was a big kid, but he was not known in the neighborhood as a violent kid. In fact, he was known in the neighborhood as a thief. I saw him descend into a pattern of hanging out with people who were very questionable, street kids. And I saw him go down a road where he just became kind of not exactly a thug, but a lowlife, right? He was hanging out with kids down on Greystone Avenue. And to those from Riverdale, you know what Greystone meant in those days. Those were like the bad kids. Okay. And he lived down there. He lived at 3900 Greystone Avenue, and he lived with his mother. He didn't have a father. And there's rumors going around that my parents and the Amans were friends. My mother did not know his mother whatsoever. There was no relation between the two, and he didn't have a father. So there was no Amans to be friends with. So if anyone is hearing those rumors, you are being once again lied to about the history of my life. But here we have, he was the resident alien, Nikolai Andre Aman. And I looks like I misspelled it, but whatever, I'll deal with that. Okay. And here's our famous 5th grade photograph. Okay, where I'm over here, right here. And just so you can see, 1983, 84, we were in 5th grade. And Nikolai was right up here. Okay, next to Ejin Kim. Ejin was the tallest kid in the class, and Nikolai was basically just Nikolai was actually the tallest kid. And of course, this brings me back to so many memories. Eduardo Santiago was the person who taught me how to do the moonwalk first. Rachel Goldstein and Barbara Scapinelli were the first girls that I ever made out with in 2nd grade. We went down to the woods with this kid right here, Eddie Martinez. We played Truth or Dare. Liza Irizarry was one of the major crushes I had in my life. Barbara Keller lived around the block from me. Very cool person. Her father was, I think, the superintendent of a building. Martha Washington was my girl. Loved her. Todd Oliveri, was great friends with him. Jennifer, I used to go to her house. She was she was Hispanic, and her mother was into Santeria, so they had all these Santeria dolls around, and it was Sharon Hawa, Russ Lana, Judd Miller, all of the gang's all here. I mean, this brings back a lot of memories. Scott, I played baseball with him. Naja, Dawn. Everybody was here. I mean, this was a great group of people, and I loved my childhood in Riverdale. It was fantastic. But there you see, Nikolai and I were friends. And I think we were still friends here. I think the incident happened in 6th grade, but maybe at the end of 5th grade. I'm not quite sure. But proving my point that Nikolai was not a violent person, here's a police report about where the police interviewed a friend of his in 1997. The sign interviewed, redacted, about his relationship with Nikolai Aman. That person states that he only knows Nikolai Aman from seeing him in the neighborhood, but did not have a personal relationship. But Nikolai was known throughout the neighborhood as a car thief. Okay. So anyway, this is just more proof. Nikolai was not a violent kid. He did not have violence in him. Now, this isn't to say that he wasn't violent the night of whatever happened in the house, but he didn't have a history of violence. In fact, he didn't really have an arrest record at all. He was a pretty good thief. And I think his arrest in Harrison was the first time he ever came on the police's radar. And of course, Mike Codella we enlisted the great Mike Codella in our search, because Nikolai's a ghost. After he gets arrested for this crime, and gets indicted and supposedly sent to jail, he disappears. He completely disappears from the scene. There's no look him up. I defy you to find anything about Nikolai Aman. Okay, he doesn't exist. He's a total ghost, and that raises suspicions to me as well. What happened to him? Mike Codella searched for me, and he found that he was released. Doesn't say the date of his release, but that Nikolai Aman was a prisoner born in 8/20/1973. Okay, I was born in May of 1973, so we were just about the same age. And he was released. And there you see the last known record, found, of course, by the great Detective Sergeant Mike Codella, of Nikolai Aman's life here in New York. So we have a few more slides to get through before we end today. And one of the things that I want to reiterate to you is now we're going to look at some police reports of the discovery of the body. And now we are going to remember how I asked you to take notes before from the newspaper articles. Let's look at the police reports of the discovery of the body. Well, first of all, I got some questions. So this person, there's a lot redacted in this, and I don't like that, but whoever this is spoke with Alfred Hunt Howell the day of his death at approximately 1700 hours. So that is 5 o'clock either in the morning or 5 o'clock in the evening. Informed the deceased that he would be arriving at the house at approximately 21:30 hours. The deceased told the person that he was going to attend a seminar at Columbia University and he was running a little late. Okay. So here we have, on the day of his death, someone was going to come visit him later that night. The Alfred Hunt Howell said that he was going to attend a seminar at Columbia University. Okay. And that this person did arrive at the house at approximately 21:30, but didn't notice anything unusual. Doors were of the garage and the front door were locked. Okay. On the morning of 4/24/96, I believe this is the caretaker, the person who found his body, went upstairs to see why Mr. Howell had not come down for breakfast. He heard somebody scream. Okay, so maybe that wasn't the caretaker. I got to find out who these people are. He went upstairs to see what had happened. He noticed Mr. Howell lying face down, undressed in his bedroom. Notice that there is no mention of bodily trauma. There's no mention of blood, pool of blood. There's no mention of any facial lacerations. He's just lying face down, undressed in his bedroom. Okay. All right. So I don't think it was the caretaker. I think the caretaker comes here, arrived by taxi cab and started to prepare breakfast. Yes, the caretaker would prepare breakfast. But again, we don't know exactly who this is. Would have noticed if garage door was left open. So the garage door was closed. All right. So did notice a missing stereo. Okay. Crystal glasses were stored in the pantry, so they were still there. He kept the cufflinks in the bedroom dresser. I don't know. Liquor cabinet was locked. It was never locked. That's interesting. And the deceased did not attend the seminar. So Howell said that he was going to attend a seminar at Columbia University. What time was that seminar? What was that seminar? And he didn't attend it. All right. Why he didn't attend it, we don't know. Did he really intend to go to that seminar and was just giving a cover story and he'd planned to stay home? Or had he been killed or died in another way and didn't attend the seminar because he was dead? We don't know. Here's another chronology. Okay. 4/24/96, DOA, Alfred Howell. Somebody arrives. Somebody drives Mr. Howell to Columbia Medical Center. 8:44 in the morning, something from Columbia, pick up, drop her to meet Mr. Howell for lunch. So he was hanging out with people that day. Returned to 4602, 12:30. Left 4602 to pick up somebody. Stopped to make future lunch reservations. 1500, 3 o'clock. Drop off somebody. 3:15. Mr. Howell drop off somebody at the subway. So seemingly he was alive at 3:15 in the afternoon. Okay. Alfred Howell, 1. I don't know what's being said here. Home at the time of discovery. Who was home here? Bedroom door unlocked with key and cylinder. House alarm not activated. When alone in the house, alarm is activated. When expecting someone here or a visitor, alarm deactivated. Body discovered at approximately 7:25. Bedroom open freely. There was bananas missing. Would notice of garage door, stereo not missing, kept cufflinks in the bed dresser, stamp, something stored in crystal glass, liquor cabinet was locked, never locked. And he did not make the Columbia University seminar. Now, the thing that I have a question about is this right here. Was Howell expecting a guest that day? Because it said here that the house alarm was not activated. And the only time that the house alarm was not activated is when expecting someone, we don't know who, or a visitor, the alarm is deactivated. So this alarm should have been activated, and it wasn't. And the only times when this alarm was not activated is when there was a company expected, or when someone was supposed to be at the house. But when alone in the house, alarm is activated. That's like a standard thing in this house. So the house alarm not activated, that makes me wonder, was Howell expecting someone? Was Howell expecting a person who we don't know who it was? I'm even going to go further. Was Howell expecting Nikolai Aman to come to his house that day? And he didn't tell anybody about this relationship that he had with Nikolai Aman. Again, speculation. We are just starting to ask questions about this. But these are things that we need to think about, because the fact that the alarm was not activated is something that would raise my antenna. All right? It means that he knew someone was in that house, was coming to that house. Or as book club said, could be a housekeeper. I'm not quite sure. So here's police reports, and again, we're going to compare them to the newspaper articles. So this report was on 4/23/96 at TPO. I don't know what that means. Reporter states deceased was found by him. Okay, so someone in the house found Alfred Hunt Howell lying face down in an upstairs hallway to bedroom with a large amount of blood around him on the floor. Medical examiner to release body to family upon someone signing the death certificate. All right. So here it says that he was lying in a large amount of blood. But the question that I have is, when in the newspaper articles that we saw, the initial report said nothing suspicious. And then the newspaper articles go on to say that he was shot millions of times, bludgeoned with a candlestick. How could a cop miss that? Right? Yeah, large amount of blood. But you would see if a person was shot, and you would see if a person's face was bloody and crushed by a candlesticks. So Book Club Warrior just said time and place of occurrence. Okay, so very good to know. So Hypatia correctly says discrepancies abound. Okay, now that's one police report. Here's another one, taken 2 days later. On April 24th, 1996, at 9:10 hours, detectives, and we don't know their name, responded to the place of occurrence and personally interviewed, we don't know who this is, of the subject, right? So maybe someone either related to or working for Alfred Hunt Howell. Also, when President interviewed was the something. It was he was someone. We're not sure who. It was he who had discovered the subject, Alfred Howell, DOA, dead on arrival, in an upstairs hallway where he had apparently collapsed. An examination of the scene and body revealed nothing suspicious. So weird. Why does one police report 2 days ago saying he was found in a large pool of blood, a large amount of blood, Why does this report not say anything 2 days later about any blood whatsoever? In fact, an examination of the scene of the body reveals nothing suspicious. So how come that newspaper article is talking about bullets being pumped into this guy's body, blood everywhere, hitting in the face, bashed with candlesticks? The police report is telling me nothing suspicious. But then weirdly enough, the previous police report saying found in a large pool of blood. Why aren't these matching? Something is weird about this. Here's another police report taken 4/23, so the day of occurrence. Okay. It says here, at time, place of occurrence, reporter states deceased was found by him, home attendant, lying face down in an upstairs hallway to bedroom with a large amount of blood on him on the floor. Medical examiner to release body to family upon Dr. Pastille signing death certificate. So again, they're giving away this guy's body with no autopsy. Okay, here's another police report. 4/24, the day after. Victim lying face up, down, hanging in the bed. Oh, wait. Okay, so victim lying face down, partial clothes, only the undershorts. So here we have him wearing undershorts. In the previous report, they found him undressed. Okay, now that could mean the same thing, but here they're saying undressed. They didn't mention anything about undershorts. They said undressed, which to me means naked. Okay, but I'm not saying that for sure because undressed could mean he was wearing his undershorts. But that says undressed here, and then this new report says here that he was wearing only partial clothes, only the undershorts in bedroom. This says nothing about blood. This report says nothing about shot multiple times, lacerations on faces, bashed in head with candlestick, right? So these initial reports coming in from the 50th Precinct Detective Squad are contradictory in and of themselves. Okay? But they're also contradictory what was later confessed to allegedly by Nikolai Aman, and they're contradictory absolutely to what later came out in the newspaper articles. On 1/29/7 at approximately 8:30, the interviewer now interviewed somebody about the removal of Alfred's body from 4602 Palisades Avenue. So the deceased body was removed to Williams Funeral Home and then shipped to another place for cremation. The remains were subsequently entombed. Okay, based on the above information, the assigned recommend that this case remain closed. Notice no mention of an autopsy. Laney, this is a great question. There's no time of death ever given in this. We don't know. So that's what makes that first timeline that I spoke of, that I showed you a little earlier, so confusing. Because he was supposed to go to something at Columbia University, but didn't make it. He was seen by many people that day, that afternoon. He was driving people to the train station. He had plans with someone, but then said that he was going out. He never went out. What was the time of death? Right? Was there a wake? We don't know that either. Okay, and so on and so forth. And 4943, I think this is a joke. Are there staple holes in the document? If that's a joke, that's funny. I don't quite know what that has to do with relevancy, but maybe it does if you want to explain that further. But here we have again proof that there was no autopsy, which is highly, highly unusual in any case of death where the person is found, right? Again, I read that book that this should have been an automatic autopsy. So who was able to make it so there wasn't an autopsy given? Why wasn't there an autopsy? So here we have book club saying there should have been a time of death on report, usually when EMS personnel arrives on the scene. We have nothing of that. Okay, was the body in the care of the medical examiner at any time or taken directly to the funeral home? So great question, Sam. And I think that this is the only proof we have of anything. The deceased body was removed to the Williams Funeral Home and then shipped to somewhere else for cremation. So I don't see body being at the medical examiner's office at all. Okay. Was the funeral public or private? Either way, who was present? Reminds me of The Third Man again. And then book club, who's always here to provide, again, sober analysis from a veteran policeman. No autopsy because deemed not suspicious. But then book club, I have again we go back to the contradictions of why are the newspapers saying blood riddled body, bashed on the floor, candlesticks, lacerations, bullets constantly pumped, and the initial police report says one says large pool of blood, and the other says nothing suspicious whatsoever. Contradictions. So getting back again, so what we just seen, where we read nothing of bullets, lacerations, a bashed in body. How do we get then this Daily News article again as the bullet riddled body of millionaire Alfred Hunt Howell lay in a pool of blood in his Riverdale mansion? His accused killer calmly strode, and the man tried to grab him, but the defendant kept firing until the man stopped moving. Blood was pouring out everywhere. Sorry, that if that actually occurred, there'd be blood spatters on the wall. We've all watched enough Forensic Files to know there'd be blood spatter. There'd be footprints of blood leading out of the house. There'd be blood all over the walls, right? No mention of that whatsoever. So to conclude today's foundation laying show, which is a record length for me, 2 hours and 15 minutes, here are my contradictions and questions. Report from the caretaker said he was undressed. Okay. But the report from the police said he had on undershorts. Now, all right, we can parse that out. We can, that's not the biggest deal. But one report says large pool of blood, and one report says nothing suspicious. No report says anything about violent blunt force trauma and or gunshot wounds. Yet newspaper reports talk about Howell being shot and bludgeoned, and no time of death is given whatsoever. So there's a lot of questions here. We have a surprise guest coming on in a second. Let me just get my headphones on. So we have a lot of questions here, and hold on, I'm getting some echo. Let me just mute that. And this is not making sense to me. Okay, this is insanely confusing to me. So we've established a lot in today's show so far. We've established that this guy Howell was not just some random old man being found dead in his house. This guy was probably a member of American royalty, the American deep state, the people who truly run this country and subsequently the world. We have all of these contradictions between the initial police reports of the finding of his body and what was later reported in the newspaper. We have internal contradictions with Nikolai Aman being a person who was not known in the neighborhood as a violent person, all of a sudden now exhibiting intense homicidal mania. We have the reports of this guy being undressed. We have these weird reports of why wasn't the alarm system activated? So there's a million questions we have, and in subsequent installments of this series, we are going to start looking deeper at Nikolai's confession, comparing what he actually confessed to the actual forensic evidence that exists, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with some conclusions. But first, we have someone near and dear, special to me, and of course special to the audience that we have built up here over the last 2 years. May I introduce to you one of the most dapper gentlemen who I have ever had the pleasure of knowing in my world, in my life. The one. Moet, I think you're going to want to get ready for this one. The only Eric. Eric, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm fine with a new light on a stand. Anyway.
Great.
Hello, everybody. Fascinating. Excellent. And it's thanks to your Son of Sam research. That was the foundation. You're like, you've gone from here to way, way up here. It's excellent, Manny. You know, just last evening, I was reading the Morris's book, Road Spooks, The Intelligence War Against Donald Trump. And he goes into the history of how the deep state was formed when we had the Central Intelligence Agency. But then I just recalled, we've been using the word in our electronic mail messages of deep state, these elite families, correct?
Right.
I recalled when fellow I used to talk to, he used to come on Juxtaposition. He was big in banking, accounting. He says, yes, but the CIA needs money.
Right. Right.
They can't function without money. So after World War II, they need an international intelligence service to maintain their financial interests. And there you have it. This deep state finances them, and they play a strategy of tension. You mentioned Latin America. My friend Charles Marshall Upton, an idealist when he was young about Nicaragua and everything, but the same people that were financing the enemy were financing his groups. So they're all being used just to stir things up. You
Right.
mentioned the weatherman, Webster Topley.
Yeah.
Robert Merritt, God rest his soul, I never got to meet him. He never wanted to tell me this over the phone, that the weathermen, he alluded to it, so did Rothstein, were actually being backed up by intelligence services. This is
I
what's
believe
called
it.
a strategy of tension. Now, let's say the fellow elites of Howell murdered him. What was the reason? What did he do that they would put forth, I'll use the term, an extreme prejudice that he had to be eliminated? What was he doing? That fellow elites would say, we've got to do like a mafia.
Right. Well, here's my answer to that, and of course I want to preface it by saying that we don't know that they murdered him. We are not making any accusations. Right. The only thing is we've established in this show is that this guy was definitely a member of American royalty, and his death was strange, and it was strange because there was serious contradictions between the initial police reports and what later was reported in the press. All right. Having said that, I have thought about this question actually, and I was like, well, why would they need to get rid of this guy? And the only thing that I can possibly think of, and again, we are going now into fantasy land because I have no proof of this, and I want to make sure that everybody watching understands that I am going into a fantasy right here. But the only thing I can think of, Eric, is that this guy was getting old and maybe he was going to blab secrets. And the people around him knew that what was happening. Maybe he was starting to lose it mentally, and he was going to tell this to that person and that to this person.
Or his conscience finally was bothering him as he was toward the end of his life.
It's a possibility. It's something that we as researchers have to put into our little filing cabinet for future reference as something just to think about.
Now that second Christian name of his, Hunt, that's a very important English name that goes back to English royalty. And
right.
I had told you a friend of mine found that the Hunt family in America from Britain founded Southampton and had something to do with the village of Westbury. And Howell's son, notice how sometimes you saw this where somebody says he's so-and-so parish, but parish is really the second Christian name, a family name used as that.
Right.
Why doesn't it say Parish Howell? I think you said, well, his son is sometimes listed on more than one site as only Alfred Hunt.
Right, but we're talking about the other son, Henry Parish.
Yeah, right. But they sometimes have themselves known by the maternal family name and don't put up the name Howell, as if they want to disassociate themselves from this. This goes with the rushed up and hushed up possible murder case, the funeral, maybe no wake.
No autopsy.
Right.
Immediate cremation.
Yeah. Now, if Aman, Nikolai Aman was known to Howell, and then we have this story where Nikolai Aman is speaking from jail and gives this information. In fact, do we know who went to meet him? Because you said he had only 1 year to go for the burglary, and yet all of a sudden he starts to confess to a murder or being there during a murder.
Right.
Who approached him?
Well,
Was it
that's what we're going to get into in our next show.
right?
The answer is I haven't done that deep research yet. I'm
Right.
taking this slow.
Well, you have to take it slow because
right.
it's not like the Son of Sam where things are really on a silver platter that you can start from.
Right.
But maybe they made a deal with Nikolai Aman. Maybe a deal was made where he's just a front man.
I think anything is possible, especially given the fact that Nikolai was not known as a violent person and the fact that he literally became a ghost after his so-called release. He doesn't exist anymore. And I'm just going to put out there for the audience's sake something that two veteran policemen told me after reading these reports, that the possibility exists. Now, I'm not saying this happened, but we do need to be fully and upfront, and we are going to talk about this in future episodes, that Nikolai Aman was a rent boy. He was there for reasons other than stated goals. In fact, might have been some gay activity going on.
With Howell.
Correct.
Yeah, and maybe actually Howell's death was caused with an altercation and he did not intend to murder him, giving credit to the fact that you say he was never a violent person.
Right.
Because if there was that, and in fact, apologies to the family, we're not trying to say this is definite about
Right.
Howell.
We're just talking about the strange death. This is weird.
There is a pattern in crime history. The famous silent film actor Ramon Navarro, who went into, who they would call in these people, these rent boys, these people who are not from wealth, but because they have the wealth, the rent boys or the not even homosexual, they could be heterosexuals who just sell themselves.
Right.
And Navarro's body was found like that. There's a pattern of these bodies being found like that.
And let me tell you about some rumors that were going around Riverdale in those years. It was rumored that Nikolai was known to this guy, that he was actually a handyman, that he went to that house quite often and provided handyman services to this guy. I don't know whether this was reported. I'm trying to find that in an article from those years, but it definitely went around as a rumor amongst everyone who talked about this in those years, that Nikolai was not a stranger to Alfred Hunt Howell, that these two knew each other somehow. Now, again, we are being very careful about what we're saying in the fact that we are not stating these as facts, but we are conducting an investigation as if police would conduct an investigation, and we are talking to each other about motives. And so this has to come up.
Historical speculation. Nobody's being accused, no allegations, because it's not as if with the Son of Sam, we know, or Charles Manson, we know what's true, and then there's that which is not true. But I also, it just occurred to me, I might have put it in the chat, somebody out there so afraid, paranoid, because these people are paranoid. They never cease being paranoid once their inner world is open. Whether it's a political group that's tiny and for 20 or 30 years they're alone, or a certain negative Freemasonic group or whomever, they always are, they're courteous to you, but then they're suspicious. Well, why has Manny or Eric or someone questioned us? How do they know about that? So what they will do is they'll have a cover up. They'll deflect. They'll make you say, yes, let's tell them there is a crime, but put that crime elsewhere. So I want to know who was behind taking this case and making it turn toward the Son of Sam.
Well, I don't know that. I think that
follow me? It
yeah,
deflects us from the real trail, the real pathway.
We don't know. And the other thing that I want to put out there is that according to the official story on this, Nikolai just blurted this out of the blue. He wasn't forced or coerced into this. And so that does raise the question of him actually being guilty, because no one was suspicious about this death. This was obviously a quietly and quickly covered up death, right? That we know. And no one was talking about it anymore. So the fact that Nikolai, according to the official story, just randomly blurts it out, I thought this was the perfect murder. Right?
Yeah.
Why?
He might have done it.
Well, the question is, did he actually do that? And we don't know. And
did he actually blurt it out?
Well, according to these files, this all started because Nikolai opened his mouth. He was arrested for a burglary in Harrison, New York, and he started telling cops about a murder in Riverdale that he was not guilty of. He said that two of his friends did it, and we're going to get into that in our next installment. But he didn't confess to actually doing it at first. So even that's strange. There's something, again, this is why I call this series The Strange Death of Alfred Hunt Howell. And I'm not even calling it The Murder of Alfred Hunt Howell, because we don't know what the hell happened to this guy. The truth is, we have no clue.
And it's not trivial when you say strange death. Many people say that, but this truly is strange.
Yes.
This is the oddity of oddities.
Exactly. Anyway, Eric, listen, we've been going for 2 hours and a half.
God bless you.
As you know, I was done an hour ago, but we had a lot to get through, and I think
nobody would think you were done. You were high octane.
Actually, we're up to 92 viewers, so we're doing even better than I thought, and people, I think, were very into it.
Oh, yeah.
So I do want to end this episode today. Eric, it's awesome seeing you.
Awesome seeing you.
I'm
I'll
sure
be
that
on tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a big. I've notified over 300, 400 people. Every contact I could think of
about the Nicholas Schreck interview.
The Nicholas Schreck, both.
Nicholas Schreck is going to be great. This is a guy whose mind I really admire, who's been through the trenches of the true crime world, and is another one of these kindred spirits. Well, I'm a kindred spirit with him because he is of the old school. Me and him, two people who are interested in getting to the truth and cutting through all the bullshit, and have taken a lot of heat for it. So Eric, listen.
Yeah. One thing, look at what Book Club wrote. Why would you give info on a homicide that was categorized as a routine death at home?
This is a great point, and this is another reason why I call this the strange death and the strange aftermath of Alfred Hunt Howell. There's a lot of questions that we have here.
Have a blessed Sunday. God bless you. See you tomorrow evening. How's the new light?
Eric, you look fantastic. And in fact, I know a lot of people out there are probably like, hey, do another Psychiatric Sunday, do another one. But Eric, we're going to be talking about this case at this point.
Please, we had to recover from the Psychiatric Sundays. We got so deep, that was so morbid and dark. All right, God bless you all. See you around, mate.
Thanks, Eric. Talk to you soon.
Tomorrow.
Yep. Bye-bye. All right, guys. Well, listen, that's pretty much it. Excellent first episode. I was highly into this. I know that you guys are coming along for me on the ride. I had a feeling that this is going to be a very popular series. I think that the questions that we raised here are incredibly important, very intriguing, and in my opinion, blow the Son of Sam case completely out of the water. As I've said a couple times in this episode already, son of who? Anyway, listen, we are carrying on. We are forging ahead. This is a very strange case. It's near and dear to my heart because not only did it take place in my neighborhood, exposing in many cases the seamy underside of this very exclusive enclave, but we're dealing with American royalty here. And I think that that is really key to understanding this whole thing. And hopefully one day at the end of this investigation, however far we're able to go, we will understand it. And to that end, again, I threw a stone in the pond. I hope that it catches people in its wake. And if you are a contemporary, if you are from this neighborhood, if you know anything about this case, we are actively seeking you out. And we want you on camera, and we want to talk to you about this. We want to fill in the blanks. Because as I said before, this is a very, very weird case. All right, guys. Well, listen, thanks so much for hanging with me today. I'm not quite sure when the next live stream is going to be on this, but I'm continuing working on it. And we will see you at the next installment. Thank you so much.